Okay, good morning, everyone. We have an action-packed, fun-filled day prepared for everyone here. Today's going to be a little disjointed because there are some items that have come up that are time-sensitive. So we're going to begin, obviously, with our capital budget, and we're going to get as much of that done as we can between now and 1 o'clock, at which time we will switch over to special council. We'll be talking about it's a bit of a provincial potluck today. We got Bill 66 we'll be dealing with, or as the environmentalists are calling it, Bill 666. And then we're going to finish up any capital stuff after that between 1 and I believe 4 p.m. No? We're dealing with cannabis first? Sorry, just click in there, Mr. Chapman. Go ahead.
So caucus is 1 to 2, special council 2 to 3:30.
Oh, that's right.
And then we'll resume budget if needed. And then I believe it's at 4:30, Diana, that we're back into special council to deal with the other issue.
Okay, and we'll be finishing the day on a high note with the cannabis issue. So, I had to make one, so. So with that, I'll be here all week. So, Mr. Haggie, you kicking us off? Mr. Chapman? Oh, Mr. Lautenbach, okay. Good start.
Good morning, Chair Davey and members of the committee. Today we're going to be talking about the capital budget. And again, residents can connect a number of ways. Just want to remind everyone that the budget survey is still available. It's online till January 16th. And if we look at the calendar, January 21st will be public input night, where we'll be sharing the results from that survey and other feedback that we've received through the budget process. You heard about the 2019 budget priority investments last Monday: road safety and cycling, environmental sustainability, improving customer service, and maintaining and investing in infrastructure. And when we think about the capital budget, really there are two areas where there is significant capital investment proposed, one being under road safety and cycling, where we have the example of protected bike lanes, which are being proposed to be implemented. We also have City Hall outdoor spaces and Carl's Air Square, the redesign and rehabilitation of the square. And the details related to all of the priority investments are included in issue papers, which we'll talk about later today. When we think about how council identifies priorities that go into the budget, there are a number of ways and things that you consider throughout the year. Some recent examples that will be coming up will be the strategic plan that you'll be considering in 2019, and that will really set the strategic direction for the municipality over the next 4 years. And so you'll see that the budget will start reflecting those priorities that are identified through that plan. Another example being master plans, leisure facility master plan being planned to come back in 2019 as well. And so that will have an impact related to the forecast that you see, changing the forecast over time depending on decisions that are made as part of that process. When you look at how we prioritize projects within the capital budget, priority is obviously given to projects that are required to meet legislation. So examples being bridge inspections and repairs. We also have replacement of assets to ensure continued delivery of core service to the community. And then we also have priorities that support objectives that are supported by council. So when you think about the investments in cycling or trails or parks, those are types of examples that you also see within the capital budget. In terms of the process, we talked a bit about this last Monday in terms of the operating budget, and it's very similar for capital in that guidelines are provided for staff, and really the starting point is the 10-year forecast, with adjustments being made at the final year where new projects are being added on, and also focus obviously being on the current year coming up. So for 2019, looking at what the forecast was and making adjustments to that forecast, you'll see that some projects do change depending on timing, and so that will be some of the changes you see across the 10 years. And then a comprehensive review does take place, again, with corporate leadership team providing that review with departments to ask questions related to projects that are included to make sure they align with what we think are council's priorities to be included in the capital budget. In terms of projects that are not in the budget, when we think about the full extent of implementing asset management plans, there are some components, the water infrastructure program being an example, where rates were established and we are providing some funding both on the capital and operating side to address our underground infrastructure. We have a number of plans that are underway and in various stages, and over time you'll see more information on other assets coming forward for consideration, and that will influence what you see in terms of the budget, in terms of funding for those replacements. The capital budget really is focused on investment that will have a long-term benefit for the community. So when you think about replacing various assets, they have a number of years that they will last. But in terms of projects themselves, you'll see that most of them do span multiple years, and the timing of those projects are reflected in terms of how the funding is aligned within the forecast. They do have a defined scope in terms of a start and an end, as opposed to the operating budget, which is more annual in nature. And again, the focus being on renewing existing assets or potentially creating new assets as well. So it's not surprising to see significant expenditures included in the capital budget to improve whether it's land or building or the other assets that the municipality is responsible for. And when you look at the highlights for this year, there's 410 total projects within the capital budget, 1.2 billion being proposed over the 10 years, and over approximately 100 million in the first year in 2019. If we look at how that breaks down over the 10-year in terms of capital investment, it's not surprising to see that the large share of the capital budget is for some of our largest assets, being full road reconstruction, our underground infrastructure, roads, bridges, and sidewalks, natural gas, city facilities. But you can also see there's a number of priorities that the capital budget addresses, which is reflected in that breakdown. In terms of how the funding aligns with that, obviously the enterprise budget funds a significant portion of the capital budget, particularly when you think about those assets that we just saw. And then on the tax supported side, there are other funding sources, such as the capital pool. Federal gas tax is something that we did get a bump in this year, going to $7 million that we receive annually, and that is being indexed over 5 years. And so those sources of funding are applied to some of the other assets across the capital forecast. Just want to mention briefly again, a positive trend that we are seeing is decreasing city debt, and that's predominantly related to EDIF debt that is coming off the books starting in 2020. And again, that will provide some flexibility for the city as we move forward. And so really final thoughts before we get into the detail of the budget. The capital budget really does balance a number of priorities, both existing capital program and new investments. It's always a bit of a challenge to try to fit everything in within the capital budget, and so staff do our best to make sure that what we bring forward reflects what we think are the right priorities to move ahead with. There are some key investments in 2019, as I mentioned, the protected bike lanes being an example, Carl's Air Square as well as others. And in terms of debt, again, you heard it on Monday, but really coming in line with sort of industry benchmarks at a 1-to-1 debt-to-reserve ratio. And so with that, I'll open it up to any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Kennedy. There is one. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, going back to C20, you show a 10-year capital forecast of $1 billion. I just did a little exercise where I took last year's figure, that figure, and I took out 2018 and added 2028 to have a similar 10-year period, and I came up with a figure of $1,157,000, whereas last year our 10-year figure was $1,119,000. That's a $38 million increase over the 10-year period, or about $4 million a year. Where did that come from? How does that happen? We've added a lot of things in here. So.
I can't speak specifically to the numbers that you've provided, but what we can say is we will be highlighting later on in the detailed presentation some of the changes that have taken place. So when you look at 2019, there's obviously investments that have been added in, but when you look also on the final year of the forecast, we're adding another year there as well. But potentially, as we go through that detail, if you still have that question, we can attempt to address that.
Well, yeah, I did add the whole 2028 and subtracted the whole of 2018, because that's gone. So, yeah. Food for thought.
Thank you. There are no further questions. So we're going to get into the boards next. Thank you, Mr. Lautenbach.
Like last week, Center in the Square is here and KPL is here to address their specific budget. So we'll invite Center in the Squares up first. We'll invite them up to discuss if there are any questions from council.
Very good. Center in the Square, you're up. Morning.
Morning. Speak to.
Okay. Did you have any comments prepared, or sorry, you're just waiting for questions? Okay.
Just looking for questions.
Okay, very good. So I'm not seeing anyone in the queue for questions. No questions in the Square Capital. I would actually, I wrote it down here somewhere. C100 is their page flip. If you want to switch to there, it's pretty. There isn't a whole lot of detail there, but I think things are as planned for the capital forecast. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, this is a question for staff. But I was just looking at the 2018 budget, and there seems to be a lot of repeat in what we're seeing in today's budget. So on page C26, oh no, C29. Oh, where am I? Okay, C26, which in 2018 was C29, and the 2017 update, it says exactly the same as it does under the 2018 update in this current budget. So I'm just a bit confused. Like, some of these projects say they're completed, yet and they said they were completed in 2017, yet they're reappearing in our current budget. The same with page C27 and C30. It's again the same. It's like just a repeat of what the 2018 budget said. So I'm just a bit confused about what I'm looking at here.
Okay, and sorry, Councillor Chapman, are you referring to the 2018 budget document?
I'm comparing the 2018 budget to the 2019 proposed budget.
Okay.
Well, they're both proposed, but so if I look at on page C26 of the current budget, it says under 2018 update, it talks about the roof replacement and repairs completed, major HVAC replacements completed. All of these things are completed, but in the 2018 budget, it also said that those things were completed.
Okay, I'm wondering if it might be a reminder, but can we speak to that?
So through the chair, a number of the projects that we started in 2017 actually did carry over into 2018. We had some significant delays with weather and some other issues. So I don't have those in front of me, but basically they've carried over and we've started new ones that will be continuing into 2019.
So that's why I wanted to direct this at staff. So when it says completed, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're completed. Like in the 2017 update, in the 2018 budget, it said that all of these things were completed. In the 2018 update that we get now, it also says all of these things are completed. So that's my
Okay, Ms. McGoller, did you want to add?
Yes, so through you, Chair. The one thing I do want to add is that a lot of these projects are phased, and so one element of roof replacement might be completed, and then the next phase is initiated. And so that's the same in terms of the accessible washrooms, some of the energy efficiency measures. They're phased projects, so one phase is completed, and then the next phase is initiated.
Okay, because it would be useful if it actually said that. Phase 1 completed, not because here it appears to look like the whole project has been completed. Okay, no, that's it.
Okay, thank you. There's a few more in the queue now. Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, I'd like to just follow up on the same point that I made previously, and I'm looking at your 10-year forecast, and your total expenditures are 6.1 million, our total plans, and last year for the 10-year period it was about 7.5 million. So we're overall the city's gone up. Can you explain why your figure is lower this year? It's something.
Yeah, so through the chair, we did a significant amount of work on that 10-year budget this year, and through our process of assessing a lot of the projects that were identified in a 2016 building condition assessment, we were able to defer some. So that figure reflects those deferrals. However, we have 3 major studies either started or happening in early 2019 that will inform the next 10-year capital plan, and that figure will then likely go up again. So we were trying to make room in the budget, anticipating future costs.
Okay, very good. I was wondering if I know there was a lot of catch-up required, and it sort of indicated to me that there has been some catch-up accomplished. I just want to go back, if I can, to the operating budget. There was an amount, resulting from an apparent profit for the year that you were asking to apply that to some capital projects. That's not included in this capital forecast. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Singh.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So some of the capital improvements are kind of linked to what we had seen, what the city is endeavoring to achieve to meet our greenhouse gas reduction targets through the the issue paper 03, OP03, enhancing the city's environmental sustainability. For example, on C27, interior light conversion to LED, is there a ability where the building is owned by the city, where we can partner with Centre in the Square, where if we were to assist with that LED conversion, that the payback period could fund the monies out of the reserve that we are planning to establish?
So that'd be a question of staff. So, Councillor Singh, the question essentially, can that environmental funding potentially be applied to the Centre Square?
Environmental funding can be applied to Centre Square, but the payback period would be funding back to that reserve back again.
Okay, can staff respond to that now, or is that something they would want to follow up with? Mr. Eden? Oh, sorry, there's Mr. Eden on this one for a second.
Through the chair, I would like to follow up with other staff on this to confirm who actually pays the utility bills and see if there would actually be a payback to the city on that if that was what we funded through.
Okay, good. Look forward to seeing more information on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Davey. I'm happy to see the continuing HVAC replacement and rehabilitation. Just curious, I know when we went through the art gallery, there were issues with their ability to store art because of humidity and leaking roofs and things like that. Is this been taken care of, or is this part of what's being looked into for 2019?
The multi-zone?
We have replaced the multi-zone unit at the gallery.
Okay.
And we are working on building envelope issues. So most of the roof work is done at the gallery. We did an extra project at the gallery last year to replace the roof over the main gallery itself, which was an extra. So we're eagerly anticipating that some of those envelope issues have been resolved, but this winter will be the test.
Okay, good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually just have a question. I think it's mostly of staff, but you might want to stay up. Oh, Mayor Brennan, do you want to go ahead? Oh, okay. Actually, so my question was, and you guys can comment if you want, but I think it's mostly the staff, was based on, because it's a capital item, sponsorship and the actual naming of the center and the square of the facility. So the question of staff I would have, number one, is that something that is under the board's responsibility? Are they allowed to? Would they get the money? Is it the city's responsibility? Or do we get the money? And is anyone looking at it at the moment? Ms. Rabb.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Davey. I think it's an interesting question, something we can take away and talk to you about Centre in the Square about. There is nothing in the policy specifically around Centre in the Square as a facility, and so I think it's something that we would want to discuss in terms of a financial agreement. I'm not currently aware of anything in the works, but there may be something that we can speak to them about.
Okay, so our internal sponsorship people, they don't have the Centre in the Square as one of their priority items at all?
It's not, I can tell you it's not on the excluded list of facilities. So council, you'll recall the auditorium is one of the excluded facilities. Centre in the Square is not on the excluded list. So certainly it would be open to discussion around sponsorship or naming rights.
Okay, great. And so since there's no policy then, so there is no indication whether the money would go to the city or to the board yet?
Yeah, that's correct. It's not set out in the policy where the funds would go. Typically, the philosophy was whoever the funds would go to the sponsor or the host, but I think that's something that we would want to take away and have a conversation with Centre in the Square about and come back to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mayor Verbanich, my questions are concluded.
Well, maybe just on that from a historical perspective, this is something that the Centre in the Square has dealt with in the past with the city. So a number of years ago, the Centre in the Square was the recipient of a gift of roughly $5 million from the Werner family and ATS in terms of stocks. The stocks were then, we had an investment committee for a period of time, and the stocks were sold over a period of time, and that money all stayed with the Centre in the Square and went through to the seat replacement at the time, the curtains in the hall, and a number of other things. At that time, the Werner family was given the option of naming the Centre in the Square as part of their gift for a period of time, and they chose not to pursue it. So that's the history from that perspective.
Okay, but to your knowledge, that doesn't put any restrictions on anything going forward. Okay, no. I thought I'd raise it because it seemed like an easier sort of target as far as sponsorship goes, and I think there would be a demand for that facility for naming, so that could be something we would look at. But okay, anything further?
Yeah, my only other point that I just wanted to let council know that on budget day, I will be moving a motion that you'll recall last week the Centre in the Square inquired about their 2019 surplus. I'll be actually moving their 2018 and 2019 surplus to be fully shared for capital purposes with the Centre in the Square to help them tackle the capital deficit that exists overall right now.
Okay, very good. And I will certainly be supporting that when it comes forward. But there are no further questions, guys. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. Okay, next up we have the KPL. And there's an issue paper here as well for this. It's C-174, and where is it now? The page flip is C-101.
Great, thank you. Through the chair, I wanted to state that our 10-year forecast follows the guidelines and doesn't change at all from really last year. There are no additional items for the forecast other than I did provide, with help from staff, an issue paper for the Southwest Library.
Okay, very good. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, my question is with respect to the Southwest Community Library, which probably isn't a surprise. But I want to know that if the servicing was provided quicker, would the library be able to work on a tighter time frame than what is suggested in the budget?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I will be asking that question at some point in time, but I don't think it's here to ask it, so thank you, Mary.
Okay.
Okay, very good. So I just wanted to, as there's no other questions, so I'll ask quickly. It does refer to in the issue paper on 174, a standalone library several times. Now, it's still co-located with the community center elementary school. Are they intended to be built at the same time or connected? Or is it going to be a structure that the library builds on its own?
Right. So after significant review and discussions with our community partners, including the city, it was on that particular parcel of land, the Rosenberg parcel of land, there adjacent to the current parcel is a projected elementary school from the separate school board. There isn't enough room on that particular parcel for 3 community partners, but there is room for a community center and a school, which would allow, I think, the school and the community center to share a triple gym. However, that parcel is divided by a hydro corridor, and on the other side of the hydro corridor is room for a standalone library. And the vision, and I think through our research and investigations, is that it would be a very, very nice parcel of land to develop a civic commons or a community commons, where through green space and paths and lighting, these 2 elements or 3 elements with the school are actually interconnected. So we're really excited actually about the possibility of that land.
Sorry, so the separation would be that hydro corridor then between the 2?
Separation would be the hydro corridor with between the 2.
Okay. Okay. There are no further questions, Mr. Edward. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. Mr. Haggie.
Hello, I'll be guiding the rest of the discussion we're going to have here this morning. We'll start with capital funding sources. The table that's on screen right now is the same information that's presented in the pie graph that was in Mr. Lautenbach's earlier portion of the presentation. So it shows the split, again, the vast majority of the funding coming from enterprises. This just provides a bit more of a descriptor about what those funding sources are, where they come from, and what have you. So in the following sections of the presentation, we'll be talking in a more detail about the tax-supported capital pool, about development charges, and about reserves and federal gas tax. So we'll be walking through each of those in succession over the next few slides. So the first area we'll talk about is the tax-supported capital pool. It's made up of 4 components. The capital out of current, which is a transfer from the operating budget to the capital budget, so that's like paying cash for a capital improvement. Annual debt issue, that's money that we are loaned, so it's similar to getting a mortgage or a loan to do a capital improvement. And then the city owns its own hydro or gas utility and owns the majority stake of our hydro utility, and we get dividends from those. So those are investments that we reap the benefits of, and we turn around and spend some of that to improve our capital infrastructure. All 4 of those funding sources will be shown as CC in the capital forecast. So when we get to the more detailed side of things, if you see CC, the funding's coming from one of those 4 sources. We just aggregate everything together, so I can't tell you specifically what's coming from capital from current or from the hydro investment or the gas investment or what have you. It's just all lumped together in the capital pool. We have a capital policy that we follow, and it says that the impact on the taxpayers regarding capital should be not greater than the rate of inflation. And so we have some guidelines around increases in debt charges and what have you is laid out on this slide. The specific projects are funded by debt. They have to be approved by council, so part of the budget resolution you'll be passing on final budget day will actually list off the specific capital projects that are funded by debt. So that's the only component that we can definitively say these projects are funded by debt. The rest of the capital pool, it's just part of the pool. This year, the capital contribution for this was increased by an additional $100,000 on top of the typical increase, but we're still able to keep the cost to the taxpayer below the rate of inflation, as our tax rate increase is 2.3%, as opposed to the running total of inflation at 2.4%. When we're talking about making adjustments to the capital budget, you have to consider what that means. And so if we're trying to add something into the capital forecast, it may mean that we have to decrease funding to another project. So that's essentially, if this goes in, something else of equal value and similar funding source has to come out. And then you'd have no impact on the bottom line, but you're decreasing funding to a capital project. Another option would be to increase funding from a reserve, so the gas utility reserve or the hydro reserve, but that means that we don't have that funding in the bank, essentially, to fund a project in the future. You can increase the contribution from capital from current, or CC, but that's a direct tax rate impact. So if we try to fund more in straight cash, transfer from operating, then we need a higher tax rate increase. Or we can increase debt, so we'd issue more debt, and that means we have higher debt payments, principal and interest in future years. So just keep that in mind. If there are adjustments being made to the capital forecast, there may be an impact in one of those areas. Looking to the capital pool, and I'll pause after this slide, you can see the relative proportions of funding for each of those funding sources. Debt is the top line, so there's about $3.5 million of debt that we're planning to issue this year to fund the capital program. There's a transfer of $1.7 million coming from the tax-supported operating budget to the capital program. There are dividends of $6.1 and $5.9 million coming from the gas utility or the hydro utility, and all that adds up to $17.2 million in 2019. You can see the department requests are the exact same number in year one, so we have a completely balanced capital forecast in year one. If you look across that bottom line and go out to the right, you can see that there's small positive numbers, so we've allocated slightly more funding in each year than the departmental requests, and that's normal. As we move forward, we completely balance in year one, and then we try to be very close in the other years, but not exact. As we know, as we move forward from year to year, that there will be projects added or removed, or cost estimates will change, so we adjust the capital forecast as a normal pattern, but generally stay within the same ballpark. So, like I said, Mr. Chair, I'll pause here and take questions on the tax capital pool.
Thank you. There are questions. Mayor Rabinovich.
Thank you, and this is really more for the benefit of the new councillors. I'm wondering if we can just touch on how, when we do get debt, how our debentures work. The fact that it's done in conjunction with the other municipalities through the region, and our rating and that kind of thing.
Sure, and I think that's the next thing we're going to talk about. But when we issue debt, we're not allowed to issue it ourselves. The region issues it on our behalf. And so we essentially go to the region, or they ask us how much debt we need. They do a mass issue on behalf of us and all the other municipalities in the region, including themselves. Then when the debt payments need to be made, we transfer them the payment so that essentially they have the cash when it comes time to pay the debt man. We have, within the region, a very strong credit rating. I believe it's still AAA, which is essentially the best it could be. And so that means that we get the lowest debt rates that we can. If the debt rating were to slip, it would mean that we would have to pay more to borrow. Just like if you have a low credit score and try to get a mortgage, you will pay a higher interest rate than somebody that has a good credit rating. So we're in a very good place regionally, debt-wise, and the city will see over the next section that our debt load is decreasing, and that's a very good thing for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just on that quick note before I go to Councillor Chapman, when we issue debt, and I realize the credit rating does figure into that, is the annual issuance of debt, is that subject to floating interest rates, or when we take out that debt, is that locked in until it's paid off at a certain rate? Do you know offhand?
So when we issue, the type of debt we issue is a locked-in rate at the time. So the rate changes over the 10 years. So I believe it increases. So each year the amount may be different, but it's completely locked in at the time of issuing the debt.
Okay, that's helpful. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a question of procedure. So you can transfer money from the operating budget to the capital budget. Can you transfer money from the capital budget back to the operating budget?
I suppose you could. It's not our practice. When we have capital closeouts, so when a project gets done and has extra money, the reserve policy says that funding goes to the capital reserve for that portion. We've had a long string prior to having a debt policy a reserve policy, and having operating deficits where we were taking capital closeouts and funding our deficits. But that's not really the best way to deal with things, because those closeouts happen one time. It's like you replace your roof, you have a bit of money left over, and then you end up having an ongoing cost, like you go out and get a phone that has a monthly bill that you have to pay, but you don't have enough money, on an ongoing basis to pay for it. So you can, but I would say we have a policy that essentially precludes it, and it's not a very good practice to get into.
Okay, and just on that same note, historically then, is there a certain amount taken from the operating budget each year from the tax base or wherever you pull it from every year that is automatically put into the capital budget, or is it a year, do you have a percentage, or is it a year to year?
So on the slide here, you'll see it's $1.7 million in 2019, and then each year it inflates up slightly based on the capital policy noted here. So there's a small increase to it, like inflationary increase to it each year. But if we wanted to do more capital, that would be one of the places where we could add to that capital from current amount and have more money available to do capital spending.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I just want to weigh in on Councillor Chapman's question. You heard the staff response, but I think it rests with council. The street goes both ways, and I don't think there's anything in the Municipal Act that prevents a council transferring monies from capital to operating. The decision of council.
Thank you. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I was going to touch on something else, but kind of further to what Councillor Gazzola said, there are pitfalls in that type of strategy when you do transfer from capital to operating, because capital is a one-time and operating is continuous. So if you're going to take something from capital towards operating, you're going to have to find some sort of some from somewhere else to fill that the year after need as well. So although you may benefit this year, it compounds the weight on the tax base in future years. But further to what we're discussing on page 34, so on the Hydro Investment Reserve Fund, now I recall in past years this council has touched that reserve fund, and historically is this reserve fund that this is where it has remained, or is it steadily increasing? And if you can remind the council, this is for street light reserve, or what's it towards?
So this reserve is essentially the dividend that we receive from KW Hydro.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So we get the funding from that. It goes into the reserve, and then a large majority of it goes to capital. I believe the dividend, it's dividend, and we get interest payment from them as well, essentially based on a deemed infrastructure that we.
But why have a reserve fund though?
Because we get the funding from them, and then we don't necessarily use the exact amount that we get from them each year. So to carry the balance of the amount of funding that we get from year to year, we have it in the.
So safeguard if there's fluctuation on their dividends. So then to stay consistent, then we would dip into this reserve.
We would not dip into this reserve, I would say, in that case, if there was an adjustment in their, I think I heard if there was an adjustment in their dividend, like if it was lower or higher.
That's right. Say, for example, we budgeted to receive their dividend that's going to go towards our operating capital, $3.5 million. They happen to put forward a $3 million dividend. This reserve would be used to ensure that we meet that budgeted line.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, and we look at it over the long term as well, and we keep a minimum balance of $2.5 million in it. So if there is a bit of a fluctuation there that we aren't, depending on money that we don't have.
So the minimum is that through our reserve policy for this reserve fund, the minimum is 2.5 million.
Correct.
And currently sitting at 5.8.
No, that's the amount of money we're extracting in 1 year.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Mr. Chapman?
We'll come to it later, but there is a continuity for this reserve on page 182 that shows the opening balance, the ins and outs, and then the projected closing balance of 2.6 million.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
I just wanted to point out what Mr. Chapman did. C-182 shows the complete flow-through. It actually shows you could transfer more if you wanted. So it's up to council. C-182, everything's there.
Thank you. Councillor Galway-Seelock.
If we're talking about that page, can I ask a quick question about the hydro investment?
Please.
Okay. I'm just wondering, where is the money coming in? Is that from the hydro dividend? Is that under other? I don't see it specifically.
Yes, so it's in the other line, $6.1 million, and that's the dividend and interest payment that we get from them.
So is there any way to make that a little bit more clear that that's the dividend as opposed to other? Just like moving forward, doesn't have to be this year, but instead of just calling it other, call it the hydro dividend.
So the other classification we use for all reserves.
Okay.
So if we change it for that, then somebody might look at a different reserve and think that that's the hydro. The hydro dividend is being put into the Fed gas tax reserve, for instance.
Okay. That was my question. Thank you.
Okay, no further questions. Please continue.
All right, the next section we'll talk about is debt. So that's one of the funding sources for the capital pool that we've just been considering. When the city issues debt, it's similar to if you were to get a loan or go get a mortgage. So just like you would have to pay the principal back and pay interest payments, the city has to do that as well. There's been some discussion, I believe, last week, and we've touched on it a bit here. Again, if you're familiar with mortgages, we're kind of in a fixed term, fixed rate mortgage. So when we issue debt, we do not have an option to pay it off early. If we got a windfall of $1 billion, we could not pay off our debts early. We are locked into a payment schedule and fixed in specific rates. So there's no option to accelerate those or defer them or what have you. When we issue debt, it's locked in. As has already been alluded to this morning, our debt levels are decreasing over the next few years and stabilizing around 2025, and we'll see that in the graphs that follow. For returning councillors, you'll be familiar with these these graphs. I'll explain them in a little bit of detail. You can see that our debt levels increased and reached a peak in 2013, and then are planned and have been decreasing and are planned to decrease out to around 2025, which is when we see things stabilize generally. I'll explain each of the bars. You'll see that there are three different colors. The bottom section, the yellowy orange color, is for tax-supported debt, and that's the debt that we're issuing in order to fund our capital pool. So on the previous slide, we were looking at issuing $3.5 million. That would show up in that kind of orangey-yellow part of debt. The red bars in the middle are enterprise debt. That's debt that is not borne by the tax base. It's funded by other sources. So in the section that we have right now, it's for golf courses and parking garages, as well as an expansion on the odd that the Kitchener Rangers are fully repaying. So there's no cost to the tax base for that red portion of debt. Those are recovered through other rates. The green section at the top is for EDIF, for Economic Development Investment Fund debt. That was issued over the course of EDIF. It has been completed, and we are just paying that off. And as there was a bit of discussion last week, some of that first debt is going to be coming off the books, and there's an option of what Council does with that, the debt payment space created by EDIF debt maturing starting in 2022. But you can see that that is what caused the increase in debt, and that's what's causing the decrease in debt over the next number of years. One of the measures we look at, because looking at this, it's hard to tell, do we have a lot of debt, do we not have a lot of debt? The sense of scale for a city is very different than an individual. So we look at a few measures that are provided by the province and by industry for what a decent or an appropriate level of debt is. One of them is debt charges as a percent of tax levy. And so credit rating agencies would say that we should have somewhere between 5 and 10% of our carrying debt compared to our net tax levy. You can see from here that we've exceeded it in the recent term, and that we're coming into the point where we're getting within that range of between 5 and 10% starting in 2020, and then decreasing significantly down over the next 10 years. And so we'd actually be below the target range at the end of the 10-year forecast. A second measure is debt per household, and the province suggests, or they have different ranges. They would call the moderate range between $400 and $1,000. You can see for a period of time, when EDIF debt was at its highest, we were above the moderate range, but we're comfortably within that range and decreasing down, and we'll actually be below the moderate range toward the back end of the capital forecast based on the current debt forecast that we have. One of the other measures, it was alluded to in Mr. Chapman's opening comments last week, in Mr. Lautenbach's this morning, it has to do with our debt to reserve ratio. And so essentially the target range is 1-to-1, so you have $1 in reserve or in savings for every dollar you have in debt. And you can see that in 2018, 2019, we're right at that sweet spot or that target range of 1-to-1, so that we're essentially balanced. But earlier on, you can see around before we had a debt policy, or sorry, a reserve policy, and EDIF debt was climbing, we were at 3-to-1, which meant we had $3 in debt for every dollar we have in reserve. So we have a good policy framework that helps guide us, and by following it, we've been able to achieve one of the target goals that we have here at the city. So just in summary on debt, our debt load was at its peak in 2013. We've seen that it's declining, and it's planned to decline. This puts the city in a good place, that we're not spending too much on debt payments. It provides us flexibility if there were a really great opportunity that we could potentially issue more debt. But we're currently at our debt to reserve ratio of 1-to-1, so we're in a very good place as far as debt is concerned with the city. I'll pause here and take questions on this before we move on to reserves.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, going back to C40, what debt is that? What's included in there?
All debt.
Even in the EDIF fund?
Correct.
Yeah. And this here 1-to-1, where does that policy come from?
That's not a policy, but it's a target level that we read in municipal literature.
Okay, but it's not one of the 10 Commandments or anything like that.
Correct.
Okay. When you look at that, it's very nice policy. Hard to disagree with it if you can afford it. If you look at an individual and their own home and their own life, do you think that would be the same situation there?
Depending on their stage of life, I would say no. At my stage of life, I am not at a 1-to-1.
Yeah.
I have 4 kids.
No, and that's you're exactly right. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I feel that our 1-to-1 ratio is too rich. Okay, and our taxpayers are paying for it. If I were to ask you now, the other point I've made, if I look at this schedule for the provincial and federal governments, what am I going to see?
I would expect they are not in the same stratosphere as us.
They're nowhere near it.
Mm-hmm.
No. I just, thank you. There's just a comment. It's hard to argue against this. We're in excellent financial shape. Our community is extremely fortunate. But I sometimes wonder, when we have a lot of taxpayers struggling to meet 4.5% increases, if you can afford to do both, go back and fix up all your infrastructure and at the same time be putting money in the bank as savings. It's a great way to go, but That money is coming from our taxpayers. Just a comment.
Thank you. Councillor Singh?
Yeah, and same on C-40. It's just the circumstances is bringing us to this rosy picture, which it is quite positive. In previous years, obviously, the EDIF that looked differently. Or is it just happens to be that way? Or are we actively trying to put more money into our reserve fund outside of just maintain the minimums of those balances to coincide with whatever that reserve needs to take care of, the more the immediate needs? Or are we putting greater monies into reserve because we're so conscious that we're trying to maintain a policy through this chart?
So through the chair, I would suggest, we'll see in the next section, our reserve levels are essentially plateauing. So, we're putting more into some reserves, but some are being drawn down to make investments in our infrastructure. We do see the decreasing debt charges, which is definitely helping us. I would suggest that Council has had a disciplined approach to debt and not just going out and issuing it over the last few terms that I've been around for, as well as having a reserve policy that we have been following since 2012 has helped us get to this. So it's a mixture.
So more so that we're approaching an era of low debt. That's what specifically this chart helps to highlight on. And we have a healthy reserve. Yep. And on top of it, the debt that we do have that will continue to mature over time, that's already been budgeted into our budgets. Maybe the taxpayers have already committed to that payment. It's not that it's new payments that they would be coming up with additional years.
Correct. It's not additional cost to achieve this.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnston? Oh, get you back in here. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So just to be clear, so as good stewards of our money and something that we would do in our own personal lives, that when we have extra money, we would put more money on our mortgage if we had some extra money that month. And that's what you're saying here is that that's what you're doing, is that in good times you're putting a little extra aside to pay towards that debt? Is that right?
Not entirely, because we're fixed in. We can't make a prepayment like you can on an open mortgage. Mm-hmm. But we are completely paying it off, and we're not adding to it, so we're not going out and getting another mortgage or another loan. That has not been our practice, and we've essentially been keeping our reserve levels or our bank accounts fairly constant from year to year, so we're not going out and spending money that we don't have.
Exactly. So you're just being good stewards of that money and making sure that you have some set aside.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Rabinovich?
Thanks, Chair Davey. I just want to make 2 points here as well. And I think that this is a good discussion for us to be having. But I think there's 2 things for us to consider. Ryan earlier talked about the fact that the region has been able to maintain a AAA credit rating. Well, part of the reason it's been able to maintain that AAA credit rating is because we've been able to keep our overall rates down, keep our reserves up, and so on. And the second point I was going to make is, back at the time when we did the EDIF, we were in an environment where there was a prolonged period of lower interest rates that were being contemplated, and went into debt at that time, whereas now we're seeing interest rates, at least they were on the upswing. Last week or the week before, they didn't bump them again. But the thinking, at least for the foreseeable future, is there's going to be a few more bumps. And so, potentially taking on an increased amount of debt, if that was a route that we'd consider, which I'm not certainly advising, it would come at a higher cost because of interest rates going up.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sense of this. So is there a comfortable low reserve fund rate that the city would ever consider working with?
A low reserve fund rate?
Yeah, right. So, right now we're at this level. If you were to transfer money out of the reserve funds and try to put it into operating budget or capital budget, whatever was decided, what would a comfortable low reserve fund amount be?
So the next section we're dealing with is reserves, and there are there's targets for all reserves collectively as well as individually. So I think that's probably a question left for the next section.
Okay, before I go back to Councillor Gazzola, maybe this is going to come as part of our financial planning, but when I look at the amount of money we have in our reserves, and I understand a lot of it is essentially sitting there collecting interest, why wouldn't we not steal from but borrow from reserves to pay for the debentures that we have every year? Because there's a delta in interest, right? So there might be, it might only be $100,000. That's a couple playgrounds. So why wouldn't we? Sorry, I guess the other question would be: is there anything preventing us from borrowing through the region at any point in time? So if there was an emergency, let's say we borrow from the equipment reserve or something, is there anything stopping us from going and saying we need money tomorrow because we borrowed it, but now we actually need it?
So through the chair, I believe the region typically goes out once a year, sometimes twice. They typically do it in the fall, November-ish. Occasionally they've considered doing one in the spring, so I would say we can't just snap our fingers and go get pre-approved for a loan the next day. But we do have flexibility within our reserves to draw on them from time to time, and we have done that, but we've stayed within our policy over the last number of years.
Is there a significant delta? Because we're borrowing $3.5 million. Is there a big delta between the interest that we get and the interest that we get in our investments versus what we pay on our debt?
So I believe Mr. Lautenbach looked this morning, was it 3.5 or 3.25 is the interest rate? 3.25 is what we're issuing debt at. Our reserves, we are paying our reserves around 1.5. So there's a bit of a spread there, but it's not overly significant.
So you see where I'm going then, Mr. Chapman?
Mm-hmm. Through the chair, what you've suggested has been done before, where we've structured internal borrowing formally through the region. The challenge and the reason there's a difference in interest rates is that we debenture for a minimum of 10 years in long-term debt, sometimes 15, sometimes 20, and there's been concern in terms of cash flow in the reserves to tie up those funds for that duration. Certainly if we had a long-term reserve, where we knew those funds would not be required over a 10-year period, we'd be comfortable to align the terms. But at this point, typically our borrowing within the reserves and reserve funds is
like a couple of years.
Yeah, a few years at the most. And so it's really about matching the terms up. Something we can go back and take a look at again. But for the past number of years, we've not considered it, given those mismatch in terms.
Okay, so I guess I don't want to belabor it, but this is something I would actually like staff to follow up on, to take a look at the reserves if there are any. Because again, if we're talking 2% on $3 million this year, that's money I think that we have it sitting in account anyway. I think it's something we should look at potentially. So can I make that request for final budget day?
We could. I believe that kind of analysis is probably something more likely, something we're doing through long-term financial plan coming back later this year.
Okay, if it's significant, if it's a significant amount of work, I'm happy to wait for future budgets, but I won't make Mr. Lautenbach?
Yeah, through the chair. Some of the work that we are going to be doing this year is developing a long-term financial plan, and so it's going to look at both debt and reserves, looking at comprehensive review of the reserve policies, and also potentially bringing forward a draft debt policy for council to consider as well. So I think it will be captured through that work, as Mr. Hagee has indicated, if it's something that can wait until later in the year.
Okay, I'll withdraw that. Okay, there's 3 people in the queue. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'm glad that we're finally talking about this sort of issue. What the point that you have made is something that I was looking at coming down the road, where we're planning to put a certain number of dollars in our capital forecast that we could be borrowing from ourselves to carry out. We have an existing example right now in that lead program, I believe, under the hydro, what we did, I believe that we borrowed the money from ourselves to fund that, and therefore, and the earnings are going back in there. And it's a huge possibility. Yes, we will have at the end of the next year. We'll have at the end of this year $69 million in reserves, and of course, according to staff's recommendations, the minimum should be 98 million and the maximum should be 268 million. The whole point is here, I cannot disagree with what staff are doing. If I were on that side of the fence, I would probably try to do it. And I've tried to do that in the past, and people on the other side of the fence have told me that's very nice, but our taxpayers can't afford to do that. So the whole point is here, I'm not critical of staff whatsoever. They're doing an excellent job. They're doing a professional job. They're all professionals. They're doing what they should be doing, but we are ultra conservative in a lot of that. And that impacts our taxpayers. Our taxpayers are struggling. When we give them a tax and utility increase combined of 4.5%, and then that's just our portion of it. It doesn't take into account the region, assessment changes, funding the police department. The impact on our taxpayers is considerable. So, yes, we are ultra conservative.
Councillor Singh?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think you've touched on a really good topic point. I'm glad to see that we are revisiting our, debt to and investment policies. But at the same time, because we realize we're taking approximately $3 million in debt, if we were to entertain an idea as such, that's a saving of approximately $50,000 something year over year. But I realize that there's some restrictions because we have to borrow through the region. Why that way when we're borrowing from ourselves? Could we not borrow from ourselves where then we're not locked into a 10-year, although we can plan towards a 10-year, but if an incident were to arise, then again we have that flexibility to pay back into the reserve. So can you touch on the restrictions of having to be into a fixed 10-year debenture when we borrow from ourselves?
So through the chair, we would not be necessarily fixed to 10 years. When we go out to market, the market prefers 10-year or, over, our experience has been over 15 or 5.
Whatever the term is, yes.
So for us, there would be the issue of the payback. It would increase the cost to the, instead of paying it off over a 10-year span, doing it over 5, that could be more aggressive depending on what the business case is. It has not been our practice. It's not, again, not something that we're completely opposed to, but I think it would have to be more on a case-by-case basis, understanding what the business case for it is, and we're considering it through the long-term financial plan.
And I appreciate, you're absolutely right, it does have to be on a case-by-case period. It has to be based on how much debt is needing to be taken out that particular year. Our reserve fund may not be able to, compensate the amount of debt that's required to be taken. But when it's in the range of $3 million, that's the question I think that could possibly be answered, Mr. Chair, through an issue paper. I don't think it does require extensive body of work. I think it's a fairly straightforward consideration, and what we can hope to get an answer from staff, at least before budget day, is does that $3 million debt, would that bring some critical point to reserves in the foreseeable years? That's hopefully something that can be answered in that time. I don't think that needs to be required a lot of work towards it.
Okay, I think in the very least, I think staff, without doing an extensive analysis, could provide some idea for final budget day. I would agree. If again, not looking at the full financial plan, but just if we were forced to do that in a short period of time, what might that look like? And I think, I did approximate savings. We're talking about roughly $60,000, $70,000 in savings per year for the $3.5 million. Not a crazy amount of money, but like I said, pay for a playground. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Davey. Some excellent points brought up by my fellow councillors. Good to be thinking about this. Maybe this is a question that is hard to answer on the spot, so if you want to take some time. But just wondering if there are some examples of when we had ample reserves that was helpful when we needed to draw from them. There might be specific projects, and maybe that's something, it's hard to answer off the top here, but maybe.
So I can think of one. It predated my time here. I know Mr. Chapman's mentioned it previously, is at the 44 Gaukel site. There was coal tar contamination there. I believe the cost was $13 million or higher. And basically we had to clean up that site pronto. And so if we had zero reserves, we would have been going out to the public with more than a 13% tax rate increase in that 1 year just to pay for that one project. That's if it's not overly recent, but that's one big dollar significant example that I can give you off the top of my head.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mayor Rabinovich.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad that staff did bring that up in response to Councillor Schneider's question, because I think those are things that we do need to consider. I mean, the reality is that as a city, we've been well managed for a longer period of time, and as we'll see later on, there is a wide range in terms of our minimum reserve threshold and our maximum reserve threshold. We're not at the minimum, but we're certainly far from the maximum. And so I think we need to be very cautious to not start, taking this into new directions that and I'm open to looking at it, but looking at it as part of a comprehensive review and not one-offs that perhaps will start taking us into directions that are going to compromise things like our AAA credit rating. Because these are the things that Moody's and others look at when they make their determination in terms of the rating that this region has. And I think, we could very quickly eat up that $60,000, windfall by, all of a sudden having to pay an extra half point on all of our debt going forward. So I think we just need to think some of that through and clearly understand it before we go down that path.
Thank you. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Davey, and I think this is a really good, valuable discussion we're having. I think on a more simplistic level, the way I look at it as being a financial planner is anyone who has a household and they have a career and they're looking at their savings, it's prudent for an individual to save 3 to 6 months worth of salary on the side, and I think this is something that is exactly what we're kind of doing.
Councillor Gazzola.
I just want to make a point of what the mayor is saying, and I disagree. Our borrowings are so minimal, $3.5 million. You look across that whole schedule, our borrowings are minimal. We have very, very little impact on our credit rating. So when the credit issuing companies, they look at a lot of things. They look at what assets do you have, and we've always been relatively low in debt. As a matter of fact, back in the 1980s, we got totally out of debt and went on a pay-as-you-go basis. And at that time, I was the city treasurer and brought that recommendation to council, and it went forward. But and this policy that we're dealing with today was set up at the same time, and it left the window for us to borrow to still keep a good line of credit. So we didn't say we're not going to borrow at all, go totally cash. We left the window open to go primarily cash, but also if we needed to, we could borrow. And when we built this city hall, we went along those bases. We paid for this city hall primarily out of the reserve funds that had been set aside, out of other reserves that we had, and we also borrowed a little bit. And as a matter of fact, 3 years after the city hall was open, Councillor Ziegler, who was chair of finance, burned the debt papers on the little monies that we had borrowed for this project. So the whole point is here, yeah, it is an area we need to look at. Perhaps now is not the time to go into it too deeply, but there is the opportunity here. I firmly believe that we've gone over the board on our save. It's nice to save. Tremendous to save, and we're limited here in our savings that we have to limit it to restricted bonds and whatnot. Whereas if we could save that and invest it in the stock market, I mean, we'd be laughing. We can't do that. But the point is that it's good to save, but when you're struggling with a lot of other things, when you've got 4 kids, the most important thing is to put food on the table, and you worry about your RSPs down the road, and sometimes down the road it's too late.
Okay, thank you. I just want to close this out. I didn't actually comment that I am very, very happy with how the city is being managed financially. I think we should definitely look at this idea of potentially borrowing, but I do agree that it should come as part of a comprehensive review. I don't think for a second that it would actually hurt us in terms of any sort of credit rating. In fact, I think it would be the opposite, because we would be borrowing less money. But again, I think this is a discussion we need to have more fully and not in a short time frame like this. So I just still would appreciate if staff would just comment on that, and even if they're just referring to the financial planning work that's going to be coming up, so they can provide some comfort. The last thing I want to say in terms of our strong financial position is that a personal philosophy of mine has always been governments fail to see when they are in good economic times, and we are in the best of economic times right now. Unemployment is at, in some places in the country, all-time lows. The economy is relatively strong. I would say now is not the time to entertain going further into debt. Let's wait for a time when the economy is weak, unemployment is up at 6, 7, 8, 9%, as opposed to the 5% we're at now. That's the time to dig in, not now when everything is looking rosy. So I'm very comfortable with where we are now. Mr. Haggie, on to reserves. Sure.
Reserves are the next section we'll cover off, and they're similar to a savings account, RRSPs, if you want to think of them that way. As already been mentioned, our reserve levels are essentially plateaued over the last few years and below the minimum targets, and the next few slides will discuss them in a bit more detail. As I've already mentioned, we do have a reserve policy. It's a comprehensive policy covering all reserves. It was passed in 2012. And there are a few key outcomes of that. The first is that we use reserve funds for their intended purpose. So if we're saving to repair a roof, we're not using that to go off and do something else. A personal example, go on a vacation when I need home repairs. So we have a number of reserves that you'll see over the next few slides, and they do have specific guidelines as to what they should be used for, where the funding comes from, where it goes. And that's key to our policy. Also key to it is that our reserve policy says we should not have negative balances in our reserve. We shouldn't have overcommitted ourselves in those areas. We do have target balances for individual reserves as well as reserve funds as a whole. And there are 5 categories of reserve shown on this slide: corporate, development, program-specific, stabilization, and capital. We talk about them in groups that way, and you'll see that over the next few slides. We've also created a bit of a dashboard, so the following slides show some numbers, but if you just really want to have a bit of a handle on is this reserve good or bad, we have a color coding system, so black being that it's over its maximum target. You will not see too many of those, but there are a couple. Green being kind of where we would want to be, in between the minimum and maximum targets. Yellow, it has a positive balance, but it's below its minimum target, and red meaning that it's a negative balance. You'll see a lot of green and yellow, a few reds and a few blacks over the following slides. So the first 2 categories are shown on this slide: corporate and development. Corporate on the top. You can see by far most of those are in the yellow range, meaning that most of those reserve balances are positive but below the target level for that specific reserve. The development one at the bottom of the slide you can see is negative, that we haven't had as much development charge revenue coming in as we had anticipated, and that we're planning to have a deficit at the end of 2019. Moving on to program specific, you can see the majority of those are in the green range, meaning that they're in between their minimum and maximums. A lot of those have a minimum balance of 0, so that's fairly simple to achieve. But by and large, they are in a good place. Stabilization reserves are the ones where if we have a surplus, we put it into the reserve at the end of the year. If we have a deficit, we take it out at the end of the year. And you can see a lot of them are in the yellow range, again, meaning that they have positive balances, but they're below their minimum target. So that opens us up to a bit of concern. Just if we were to have a big negative result, we may not have enough funding there, and it may cause an increase in rates. Capital is the final section. They're split over 2 slides. These are the enterprise capital reserves. You can see most of them are in the yellow range, meaning, again, positive balances but below their minimum targets. And then the other capital reserves, by and large, are green, meaning they're within the min and max range. So that's where we would want to see those. Final slide shows total reserves. So if you look at the 2019 budget column, you can see that there's a proposed or a projected ending balance of $58 million. The minimum target is about $102 million, so that works out to being overall around 56% of our minimum target balance. So that's a bit of a cause of concern. It essentially says overall we're slightly underfunded compared to what the policy says we should have in reserves. As already been mentioned, there are some more details in an issue paper starting on page, I believe it's 177 in our package here today. So I will pause there. Oh, sorry. Just a couple final words on reserve funds. So we have a good policy framework that the Council has been following since it was implemented in 2012. But overall, our reserve balances are below where we would like them to be, according to the target levels. We've already talked about our debt-to-reserve position, that it's getting to a very good place. We're quite happy about that. So the implication is that, we should continue on with our reserve policy, trying to build those balances so that we have financial resiliency to deal with things that we don't even know are out there. I'll pause there, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. There are 2 in the queue. Councillor Gallery-Seelock.
Yes. First of all, I just wanted to ask from page C47 with regards to the development charges deficit, is that going to have any impact whatsoever on any development charge funded projects?
So we're updating our policy right now, or our bylaw. We'd have to take that into account for future projects, so we need to fund that in addition to the projects that we're planning to do. It overall may have an impact on timing of specific projects, but there's other factors to consider as well.
Okay. Then my next question is with respect to potentially asking for a couple issue papers with respect to transferring some monies from the reserves to the operating budget. What I was thinking was through the hydro investment, getting an issue paper showing the continuity schedule if we put $75,000 a year into operating. I don't know if you want to comment on that now or if you just want to do the issue paper.
So over the 10-year forecast, we have the hydro and gas utility investment reserves projected out, and I believe in 2023 they go below their minimum targets. They never get negative, but they are already planned to go below their minimum, so taking anything else would make that worse, again, meaning that if something popped up, we would not have an ability to deal with it quite as easily as we
But it's fairly easy for you to put that issue paper together?
Yes.
Okay. So I would like that issue paper, and then I would also like an issue paper with respect to the parking enterprise and see if we can have an additional $50,000 per year for operating.
Is that in addition to increasing the dividend? We took direction from operating to increase the dividend by $50,000 last time.
Sorry, I didn't remember that.
Correct. Yeah, and that's not in what's presented in the package. So
I missed that.
I just want to make sure we're not double counting.
No, you don't need a double count. I was looking at this tax stabilization reserve fund too, but I think I'm going to leave that one alone for now. So that's all my questions. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Gazzola.
Just a couple of questions. Do we not already transfer funds from the hydro investment reserve to operating? I think we do.
We do $1.3 million.
That's right. It was 1.3. So we're already doing that.
Correct.
Part of the dividend goes to operating and part of it to capital. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. My next question is on what is the tax capital reserve fund? What is that?
When we close out a capital project, it goes into the tax capital reserve fund, and then if we...
So these are all the closeouts?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, correct. Sorry, for only the tax portion of a project.
Yeah, no, as opposed to the ones that come from the enterprises. Yeah. Okay, so, I didn't understand what that was. So it really is an ongoing, you only really budget for it for a year, but it really is an ongoing thing. I mean, it's a part of doing business. We're always going to have a substantial number of closeouts every year. Okay, you don't have to answer that. That one's fine. I wanted to point out on C49, you can see there's a borrowing there for the golf courses from the reserve funds, basically. Okay, now, and that gives a big red marker, but I personally am not at all concerned about that because I offset that with what's the value of our asset there. And the value of our asset is no concerns. Just for the sake that we do borrow from ourselves.
Thank you. Councillor Singh?
Yes, thank you. I'm glad to see that Councillor Galway luck went with the direction with the hydro investment. I would like to see exactly what that impact would be, not to say that's something we would support, but I think it's good to see as that is a reserve that would hopefully continue to replenish itself from the investments that we get from hydro. The other question I had was on C49. That one got answered. Sorry, my apologies. Give me 1 second. No, I'll go back to C48. For economic development, from what's projected, 12.3 million in 2018 to what's being budgeted to 8 million, that's a significant drop. Can we touch on and why?
It's Carl's Air Square, I'm assuming.
Okay. So I took some notes last week about where the investments are planned to go. For direct expenditures, so there's $1.5 million coming out related to economic development grants. So landing pad grant, Communitech, the incubators, that's the majority of that $1.5 million. There's $2 million earmarked for potential land acquisition. We don't know exactly where, but that was put in as part of the multi-year projection for the ECDEV reserve.
So that's just going to another reserve then, really?
Pardon?
So that's just being shifted to another reserve, that $2 million, for the land acquisition?
It was earmarked as a strategic land purchase.
Okay.
Somewhere in the downtown.
Okay.
Sorry, does that mean that it's very possible that by the end of the year that 8 million will be 10 million if we don't execute that land purchase?
It could potentially. I'm not aware of what what ECDEV, if there is anything in the works.
Okay.
But the forecast was put together a few years ago when EDIF ended, and there was a portion of $2 million that was earmarked for strategic land purchase.
Okay. Councillor Singh?
Okay, that helps answer that. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Haggie, please continue.
Sure. The next section we're going to get into is development charges, also called DCs. You may hear that thrown around. Is how we talk about them. They are for growth-related funding. So the city is paid revenue through Development Charge Act to build growth-related capital infrastructure. And the principle overall of the Act is that growth should pay for itself. There is a DC Act that says that we have to impose these by bylaw. The city currently has one that it's operating under. It was approved in 2014. It expires this year in July, or I guess the end of June. So we are currently undergoing that project, something I'm leading, where we're updating our DC study. They have a lifespan of 5 years at the most, so we have to have something new in place by July 1st, or we will not be able to collect development charges. When we did the 2014 study, we had a few different objectives in place. One was balancing cash flow, essentially saying that we're planning to have enough money coming in to pay for all the projects that we're planning to do, as well as maximizing the charge. So we could charge up to what we expected we would need to cover off all those projects. When the study was approved, we were able to achieve those financial goals. So we were able to balance the cash flow and maximize our charge. This led to clear priorities as part of the DC process because we weren't able to fit in all of the asks. So some of the capital projects that were wanted would either be outside the 5-year life of this bylaw or potentially even outside of the 10-year window. Every year through this bylaw, I've been coming and as part of budget and providing an update on where we sit for DC revenues. At the end of 2017, we were on track with where we wanted to be as part of the bylaw. In 2018, we've seen that there's been weaker than projected revenue expectations, so we have a negative balance projected at the end of 2018 and at the end of 2019, as we've seen on the previous reserve section. It's too late to make changes in any meaningful way as part of this DC bylaw, but as I've mentioned, we are undertaking that as part of our 2019 bylaw, and so any deficit that we have will make up part of the next DC projection. This slide shows the financial aspects of DCs. It's hard to read up on screen, but maybe in your print version or on screen in front of you, it would be a little easier to see. If you look to the bottom line, you can see that DC reserves were in deficit at the end of 2017, but projected to be positive in 2018. That hasn't materialized because revenues are lower than we anticipated, and so we're showing a projected deficit in 2018 and a projected deficit at the end of 2019. But as I've already mentioned, some of this, all of this will be considered when we make our DC bylaw update, and the plan is to come back to council in February or March to, kick off that process publicly with you, then come back again in April with more detailed information, looking for bylaw passage in May. So I'll pause there, Mr. Chair, and take questions on DCs.
Thank you, Mr. Haggie. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Singh. Ryan, dealing with the development charges, so in theory, when we increase development charges, who does that fall on when we increase development charges?
So developers pay it. I'm expecting it's ultimately the home buyer or the people that are making the final payment that any costs that the developers have to pay would be built into the ticket price of a house.
Okay. So in other words, this is basically the crux of what creates affordability. So when I'm talking about, when we're looking at affordable housing, the more we technically increase this, the less affordable properties become. Is that what you're basically saying?
Well, I would say that's what you're saying. But yes, it's an increased cost to new development.
Okay. So I want to, is there a way for us to put input on this one when we look at the development and charge review? Is that going to be in February? Is that going to be our first kick at the can?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, I'm choosing this time to ask my question about the credit refund agreement, unless I should do it at a different time. Is now a good time? So this is with respect to the Middle Strasbourg trunk sewer, and where we're at with respect to a refund agreement for that project.
So I guess I'll give the update. We are in discussions with the developers that are interested in moving forward with a credit refund agreement. We have council direction to enter into an agreement. The group of developers has changed, so we anticipate coming back to council after budget to get direction to enter into a revised version of that, because there have been a few changes as far as the cost of the project and the specific developer group that's involved. But they are very eager to move forward and sign a credit refund agreement in the spring of this year.
Okay, and I'm going to go a little deeper, not necessarily with that, but with respect to trying to advance the timing of our community center in the South End as well as the library branch. What other hurdles do we need to get through in order to be able to open those projects sooner than later?
So I'll pass that to Mr. Gross. There's some technical explanations that he'd be much better at answering.
Through Chair Davey, I don't want to make you think that I'm not answering your question, but there are a couple of unknowns at the present time. The first unknown is the region's timing with the reconstruction of the road, Fisher-Hallman Road, primarily at Strasburg Creek, because the replacement of the culvert at Strasburg Creek is the controlling factor for work that needs to be done on the west side in the Rosenbridge subdivision. We're meeting with the GRCA on February the 6th to understand the implications of the work being done within the environmental window that we have for the work at Strasburg Creek. At the present time, the region is looking at starting their project in 2020. The work at Strasburg Creek is contemplated to be in the order of September of 2020. But as I said, we will be meeting with the GRC to determine whether all the work can be accommodated and what the details are. So I don't have a clear answer for you right now. That is one hurdle. The second hurdle, obviously, is the timing of the credit refund agreement being signed. Up until last week, we weren't sure that it was going to happen.
Are those the two?
Pardon me?
Those are the two hurdles? Those are the two hurdles?
Those are the two main hurdles.
Is there any way we can apply some pressure to the region to speed up their timing with respect to the work, not only because of the facilities that we would like to proceed with, but also with respect to the road widening and the roundabout that's required there, because traffic's a nightmare. So is there anything we can do either through the mayor or through staff, try to push that timing forward at all? Or is there anything we can do from a city perspective to increase the timing or decrease?
Through the chair, the current staff that are working to manage the project are doing a good job. There's a new PM involved, and that's the PM that has arranged the meeting with the GRCA to clarify what we can and can't do and what the timelines are. So I would say that at the moment, things are in as good a shape as they can be. The region is interested in moving the project forward as quickly as possible. But I would suggest that any other pressure from any other direction probably wouldn't be of benefit.
Okay. I think that's all my questions right now, but I look forward to hearing about the meeting with the GRCA. Thank you.
Mayor Rabinovich.
Thank you, and I just wanted to touch on development charges, and it actually even goes back to the reserve issue we were talking about earlier. I think one of the things that we also can't lose sight of the fact in all this is that we do have a new provincial government. at Queen's Park, a provincial government that is potentially going to be taking a variety of areas into different directions that will potentially ultimately impact on us financially. Hence, thinking back to the Harris days, it paid to have some reserves to be able to deal with some of those issues. One of the things that certainly portions of the development industry are encouraging the government to consider is to move away from development charges. Well, the reality that we need to keep in mind is somebody needs to pay for it. So it's either going to be through development or it's going to be paid through the tax base. And we've always had the presumption or the assumption that new development should pay for new development. And I think that has made a whole lot of sense for a long time. If all of a sudden development charges are gone, that's going to have a significant impact on us, either in terms of potential tax increases or, cuts in a whole variety of areas in order to pay for new development going forward. So that's something that I think we also need to consider as we're dealing with all these issues.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, just if development charges disappear, so will development. I'm looking to staff here for some assurance now. I'm getting a little nervous by these figures I'm seeing here in this schedule here, and if you can just look at it with me and try to on the third or fourth line down, the refunds, those are pretty positive figures, are they not? We know those are going to happen. Those are for funds that we've already collected.
So through the chair, the credit refund line, that is repayments to developers that have paid for the construction of growth-related assets. So Dune South Pumping Station, Blair Creek Bridge, those types of things.
But those are quite certain, are they not? Or has the work been done yet?
The work has been completed. There is some uncertainty about the number because we don't know. Developers get credits when they come in to draw a building permit, so that's completely up to them. Okay. The refund side, what is reflected here is that if we had to repay the full amount that they are owed in the year that it was projected to be done, that I expect our payment to them will actually be less because we haven't met our growth forecast, because that's one of the other factors to consider.
Okay, but if they do go ahead and build, we're going to have to pay those amounts out. Then that's nothing wrong here.
Yep.
Okay, I just want to look at the total picture. Now, what bothers me is this past year we had hoped to get $16 million from the developers. We only got $8 million. What happened?
Through the chair, you may recall when building was here that we didn't have as much building revenue that they had anticipated, and Mr. Sealing said that the two areas where we didn't see as much growth were apartment buildings and greenfield development. So presumably most of the apartment building stuff would be in the downtown core, which is currently exempt. So that would not be a figure or a factor, but having less greenfield development than we had anticipated would be a factor in getting development charge revenue.
So, Mr. Chapman, do you want to add?
The other issue is that revenue line is based on the growth projection from 5 years ago, and so we're at the tail end of that projection now. One of the things we'll have to do through the 2019 DC study is update that growth projection, which may change the revenue numbers going forward.
But what concerns me when I look at 2019, if we have 17 million there, and this year we only get 8 million, where does that put us on the bottom line?
So that's the risk I'm highlighting, is that as we do the 2019 development charge study, those growth projections will likely change and impact our revenue projections over the balance of the forecast.
Okay, but are we in jeopardy at all with anything here that I know that there are certain municipalities who have overexpended their lot levies, their development charges, and then, have to deal with it. Are we in jeopardy at all at this point?
I don't think it's jeopardy, but to go back to Councillor Galloway-Seelock's question, to recover back to a balanced position will certainly require some restraint in the capital program. So projects that were on the books with current timelines may need to shift to balance out the cash flow, which will be why it's very important through, for example, the Leisure Facilities Master Plan for Council to set clear priorities, because the items at the top of the list will receive funding, the ones further down may not.
When do we expect to see that in place? When do you expect this council to make a decision on our future development charges?
The DC timeline to be in front of council is February meeting, a bit of a kickoff. This is what development charges are, and get a high-level idea of priorities. In April to have the background study and potential rates, and then pass the bylaw in May so that it can be in place July 1st.
Is July the 1st the date that it has to be in place?
Yes, ours expires at the end of June.
Just a couple of questions to do with that is that if we've had required over expenditures on previous projects, you can pick those up in the new bylaw?
Yes.
You can include that with the expenses, right?
Yeah, because we take into account the existing balance in the reserve.
Okay. The other factor coming along is that the downtown exemption drops off when?
February 28th.
Okay, so that, and one last question. There's a lot of talk about affordable housing. How do you deal with that in the new bylaw? How do you deal with perhaps giving exemptions for affordable housing? Is that done within the bylaw, or is it a separate issue outside of it?
Through the chair, I'm aware of provincial discussion about that as well. So they're looking at, do they do something within the Development Charge Act or something separate? It's a question for this council. My preference would generally be to have the development charge bylaw be pure, and then if we want to incent affordable housing, to have a grant so it's clear that this is the full cost, but the city is willing to pay a portion of it.
Okay, and so just one final question. At the end of the year, we're about $5 million in the hole, and so the development charges has to be interest on that, right? Which is what rate of interest do they pay?
I believe it's around 1.5, somewhere between 1.5 and 2%.
Based on your investment?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. There's 3 in the queue. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah. Can you tell us what happens from March 1st to July 1st with the development charges? Because the 2014 Article 33 disappears, right?
Which piece?
Article 33 in the development charges bylaw of 2014. The downtown exemption clause disappears as of March 1st. So what happens with development charges from March 1st to July 1st?
So any development happening in the downtown would be subject to development charges, like March 1st until July 1st.
And those would be based on the Schedule B in the development rates dating back to, I guess to the current.
It gets indexed every year, and so, yeah, they would pay the development charge that's in effect as of March 1st.
Okay, and that would be the non-residential.
Well, it depends what type of development it is.
Residential building, okay. Just in response to what Councillor Ioannidis was saying, I respectfully object to what you're saying or dispute it, because over the past 4 years or 5 years, there have been no development charges in the downtown core, and we have 8 new affordable housing units. So to suggest that if we raise development charges or bring them back in to a rate that might be workable or that existed prior to 2014, then it's not to say there will be any more affordable housing units either. So I don't think the development charges really dictate whether we have affordable housing units or not. In fact, I think we have to start thinking about creative ways in order to introduce bylaws that will require not development charges, affordable housing units. And regardless of what the province does, Anyway, I'll leave it there because I think this is a discussion that could take forever. But those are my comments.
Yeah, this is definitely a discussion we're going to have seriously at one point. I'm not sure now is the exact time for it, but Councillor Ioannidis, I have you in the queue next.
Yeah, I just want to touch upon that and what the mayor said. I'm not saying get rid of development charges. What I'm saying is if development charges increase, those prices are always going to be passed on to a developer. And so if a developer can't make money, why are they going to build if they can't make money? So what is the positive result of that? It means nothing will get built, and so there'll be a lack of supply. And a lack of supply means there'll be a raise in prices. So what I look at this issue as, especially when it comes to dealing with affordable housing, if it's affordable housing is a city issue, then I'm not saying not raise taxes. Maybe taxes is the right way to do it. Who knows? We're in a budget here that's under the rate of inflation. Why can't we be on the rate of inflation and use those funds for affordable housing as an example? So that's where I'm just trying to get at. I'm trying to open everyone's minds to understand the whole concept. That's all.
Okay, Councillor Chapman briefly, and then we'll move along.
Yeah, just quickly. I would hate to put it in the taxpayers' pocket to create affordable housing. I think when developers complain about it not being affordable, I think that's all relative. And I think there are ways, if we adopt the Amsterdam model 40-40-20, where you can have really high luxury apartments in the same building as have affordable housing, I think there are creative ways that this can be done without putting it on the taxpayer. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move along. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, this is really good discussion, but I think something that we need to delve a little deeper into later into this year. Exactly what is that right balance that we can ensure. To Councillor Ioannidis' credit, I think he's speaking to overall home ownership affordability, not specifically just affordable housing, but overall home ownership affordability, and of course a dire need in a community for affordable housing at the same time. But I'll just quickly make one comment to that though. Developer will continue to make money one way or the cost is always shifted to the homeowner. So that's something that we need to keep sight of and figure out what that right balance would be. But coming back to C-60, this is actually a really in my mind, this is a worrisome trend because we see an actual for 2017, but what was the budgeted? I want to see if that was it's a continuation trend, not just specific to 2018, but 2017 as well. I see Mr. Chapman saying that's probably similar? Okay. So that's a concern because that had to do with obviously just not 1 year where we're seeing a reduction in new houses coming on in the greenfield and apartments, but I'm sure it's over a number of years, and we're budgeting quite aggressively for 2019, and there's little data here that goes to show that we may come anywhere near this projected target. Why are we projecting higher? Are we projecting higher because we are going through the DC review, and so we will be able to perhaps be looking at increasing DC charges to meet our target budget?
So through the chair, the developer contribution line at the top of this is consistent with what was approved through the 5-year DC bylaw. So we're in year 4 and 5, so we do a lot better in years 1 and 2 of that than we do on years 4 and 5.
So just to cut you short, are we mandated to follow that projection, or seeing what we've seen in the last 2 years can be more conservative because of that?
Oh, we are not mandated to it. One of the other things in 2019, we will have a new bylaw in place in July, so the rates will adjust automatically depending on what council's decision is mid-year. So we will see a different amount coming in kind of in the back end of the year. We could adjust them. It has not been our practice as we essentially keep to the forecast for the 5 years. I will say for 2016, we did well exceed our target, our actual amount. So like I had said in some of my previous comments, at the end of 2017, we were essentially on track with where we thought we were in. So, after year 3, we were actually quite good. We were slightly ahead of where we expected to be. It's years 4 and 5 that we haven't been achieving.
And we have to be cognizant.
Mr. Chapman,
through the chair, I just want to be clear about the revenue line so that council isn't perceiving that that's an arbitrary number that's been set. When the DC bylaw is passed, it's an appealable document, and so the development industry or any other stakeholder can appeal it to the OMB. And the population growth forecast is often an issue that's appealed because it has a direct impact on how the rate is calculated. We've based our population growth projections on the region's targets, which they've based on the places to grow targets. And so while we agree that it looks as if that number is optimistic, we have no better number to use right now, but as we update the study, we will take a look at it. We're very concerned about the deficits. Had this been earlier in the timeline, we likely would have been looking at deferrals of projects. Our feeling was that because we're right on the cusp of an update to the DC bylaw, that's the process by which to look at it, but we know that there will be some pain as we look to build this deficit into the capital program. If council cannot accept this deficit, then I would say project deferrals are the thing to look at, and that would have the same impact as reducing the revenue projection. In fact, it would just make it worse. Our advice would be to wait, but certainly that's a council decision.
And that's where my concern is, to finding that next direction. Do we wait, or do we look at making some tough decisions this year? And where my concern lies is if you don't look at some of those projects that could potentially be deferred, and some I think we have greater priority than others, and we owe that priority to the community as well, is that where I think greater emphasis would have to be put on increasing DC charges if this is the continuation trend, if you don't make some of those tough calls. And then that goes to an earlier point to Councillor Ioannidis of overall home ownership affordability as well. As part of an issue paper, could we, or through this, so if you can help me focus on that information, is there anywhere that outlines the DC for this year that we're presuming to collect, what's it supporting towards the capital projects, and what are some that we could perhaps take a decision on?
So I'll turn your attention to the expenditure line on here. Projected for 2019 is $5.9 million. So even if we did nothing as far as the DC program is concerned, we would still end the year in a small deficit. As we go through the page flip, the capital page flip, you'll see lines that say DC. And so any of those projects for 2019 that say DC are the projects that are planned to be funded from the capital or from the DC reserve. I would say if you look at the transfer to capital project line in 2019 and 2020, you can see it's $5.9 million and $6.7 million. It's more out in 21, 22, 23. We're getting up to $13 million, $20 million. That's where the bulk of those big dollars are going, and those include some engineered infrastructure, but it also includes some of the recreational facilities, so arenas or pools or community centers, those types of things.
Okay. Yeah, I know it would be, the DC expenses would be all pointed out. I was looking more to any one larger project that you could reference, but we're going to be doing a page flip anyway, so we can give greater look at that time. Thank you. Oh, if I can quickly say, I think it's really difficult to do much of anything with this right now. I think we do need to be waiting for the DC bylaw review, but at the same time, I think we do need to put some greater focus and emphasis as we look through the page flip to see if there's any one project that, if we don't have already a strong commitment to the community, that we could perhaps entertain in deferring.
Yeah, that would be the only avenue because we literally can't change the DC bylaw until it expires. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer a question and also ask a question. Councillor Singh asked what happened in 2017. We had budgeted $15 million and collected $8.8 million. So as you've indicated, it was the last years 4 and 5 that we've really failed on. My question is, the budget figures you have here going forward are still based on the region's assumptions and whatnot. Will you have new figures for that when you're working on the new bylaw?
Yes.
You'll have new growth figures from the region.
Yes. It's been a struggle getting them, quite honestly. We've tried to reach out to them, but
do you have them?
We have one number. We need more.
Okay. Well, our representative on the region will push for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, just a question. So I understand I don't know where this fits in, so that's why my question. I understand that the 6.0 development, the Station Park development, there are development fees of $20 million. So where does that fit in to this chart?
And sorry, what was your first?
The Station Park development site. I understand that the development fees for that site will be approximately $20 million. Okay. So, and I presume the Schneider site, as it comes forward, will be even higher. So where does what line would that fit into on this chart, on C60?
So it would fit into the developer contribution, the very top line. The caveat I would say on that is if it's being phased, they may pay development charges over a number of years as opposed to, in one big block. The $20 million figure may be their whole cost. That would include education, region, and city. I'm just not familiar with it. So you may not be able to pinpoint a specific amount. And when we do the forecast, it is not that granular. It's based on, the type of development we anticipate having. And that was not on the radar when the revenue we have is from 2014 projections, and that specific project would not be specifically identified here.
Okay.
I think it might be useful as well if I don't know the exact number either, but I know the region charges far greater amount in DC charges. So do you know roughly what that breakdown is between what we get, or what percentage of the total DC?
Yeah, I forget it's somewhere in the ballpark of where like 25% to a third of the total DC cost, and the region is by far the bigger amount.
Right, okay. So that concludes all the questions we have. We are going to take a break for 5 minutes to take a stretch, okay? Sure. Okay, could everyone please take their seats?
If he brings it back up, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay, guys, we got a busy day, so Mr. Haggie, when you're ready.
Sure. The comments in this section are very, very brief. It's essentially just walking through a bit of the capital package, how to read it, how it's organized. So we have things ordered by department first, then division, and then by section as we're going through the next little bit. Specific projects show up on each section. You'll be able to see the different funding envelopes, or the way it's funded. You'll see that CC, what in capital pool, we've already talked about that. You'll see that a lot. You'll see DC, meaning development charge. Any of the ENT, ENT means that's enterprise funding coming from, enterprise water, enterprise sanitary, or what have you. If you see RES, it means reserve. So it's funding that's coming from a capital reserve. As we go through the budget pages over the next little while, we've got new projects identified by a check mark. So those were not in last year's capital forecast at all. They're brand new. You'll also see toward the left-hand side, there's a column that says type. And so you'll see T occasionally. That means it's a triple funded project or a full road reconstruction project. We also denote TS, and that's a project that is a full road reconstruction that has sidewalk infill. And sometimes those are of interest to councillors in those wards and the people whose roads are being reconstructed, that they're putting in sidewalks where they may not have them previously. Also in the capital forecast, in that type column, you may see a B, or C if you don't see a T or a TS, and that just goes to provide some information about the quality of estimate. So for big dollar projects, we have some information that indicates how good a number it is. And so an A means that it's a better number based on more complete information. A C means that it's still quite preliminary information, and so that there's a contingency built in. You can see here class A, B, and C, the contingency amounts are denoted here. And also if it's a capital, it means that figure is built into the project. If it is a small letter, it means it is not. So there could be a very big swing in the price of a project, especially a small C project may come in over budget. It's more likely to come in over budget than one that would have a capital A attached to it. My final slide is about budget changes. So from here on out, it will be what we call the page flip, and essentially looking through the capital forecast in sections, pausing and taking questions, and members from those areas will be here to answer questions, hopefully. Any changes that are over $50,000 are noted on the slide, so I'll progress the slide deck as we go through sections so that people can see the changes that are being made in those areas. It denotes if there's an issue paper in that area, just to twig a conversation about that. So items that have changed that are over $1 million generally have an issue paper, except if there's a DC item that's been added out in year 10. That is the end of the presentation as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Chair, and I'll turn it to you to pick off kind of what sections we're discussing, and we'll continue tracking if there are any follow-up or discussion items.
Okay, thank you. I tried to group these. I didn't actually reference the slides you have, so I have to flip back and forth. But for members of the committee, so then we're starting on page C96, okay? So we are going to look at the page flip from C96 to C99, which takes us through general expenses. If there's any questions on that. Councillor Gazzola.
I wanted to ask a question before we start through this process. It deals with the gas, where is it here? The federal gas tax reserve. Does this, looking at C97, is that an estimate of what we're going to receive over the next 10 years? Or is it firm, or what?
Through the chair, we have a commitment for the next 5 years. So we know what our payments will be for the next 5 years, and then we have just frozen our funding for year 6 and beyond at whatever the 5-year amount is.
So we're guaranteed until 2023. Right?
Yes.
Now, are there any restrictions as to where those funds can be spent?
There are. It's much more relaxed than it was when it originally came in. It used to have to be only on infrastructure, that is, like roads and sewers and those types of things. They have opened that up to, what are called soft services, community infrastructure, so community centers, those types of things.
Are there any restrictions now, though? You say they're softer, but are there any?
Yes, there are.
What are the restrictions?
The different types.
What are the major restrictions?
I'm trying to remember. I can get that for you fairly quickly. I just can't remember off the top of my head. They exclude some sections from being funded by it, and there are some cost types. So I don't believe we can pay staff costs through federal gas tax. And there may be some categories of project that it does not apply to, and they don't like, it's not for, they prefer that it's not for regular maintenance type activities.
Okay, because as we go through, I always thought it was supposed to be for sort of road work, but that is obviously loosened up.
That was originally true. That was by far the focus, and it still is. We spend about half of our Fed gas tax money on road resurfacing. That's the single biggest benefiter of it, but it is much more broad than it was 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple. C-71, 120,000 added to the 2019 for online customer service portal. And this is something that we saw focus on before, and I think this is a good direction. But also wanted to see, are we looking at opportunities where we can partner as we go into 2019? And if we need to delay, we could until we could enter into any discussion with either the City of Waterloo or the region and seeing if they're wanting to enhance their customer service experience to the online portal as well, and doing something inclusively where it could reduce our overall costs.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I know that we have had some discussions with the region. The challenge is that this is so customized to the City of Kitchener that we have a different suite of other enterprise applications than other municipalities. So just this online portal will have to be connected to Amanda, as an example. It'll have to be connected to SAP. It'll have to be connected to ActiveNet. And so it's so customized per city that there's not much chance. The other issue is that it is based on our CRM, so while we partner with the region on the CRM, the other municipalities may, I'm not sure, use a different type of CRM.
Okay, all right, it's too bad. But I'm still glad that we're going this direction. C-76 for resurfacing city streets, reduction of $2.7 million in funding over 10 years.
Councillor saying you're jumping way ahead. We're only
I'm sorry.
Page
I thought we were just asking everything. So
no.
Just page by page then.
So yes, we're paid to page 99 at the moment.
Sorry?
Paid to page 99, C99 at the moment is the questions. Okay.
Only to page C99.
Okay. So I'm not seeing anyone else in the queue. The next two pages, CTS, Center and Square and KPL, we dealt with. So we're now going to go to page 109. I'll give you a second to look. That's page 109. Yes, 100 to 109. I'm not seeing anyone in the queue. Okay, Councillor Gazzola.
It's a large area.
Sorry, Councillor Gazzola, go ahead.
No, okay. I'd like to understand a little bit about what the this new item is. What exactly are we doing here, and what is it?
Which page? Which item?
It's C104 and C68. Okay, C68 lays it out, but and it's shown on C104. But what is it we're doing with this?
Mr. Lautenbach.
Through the chair, the replacement of the point of sale system is the city's main cashiering system. So when we collect property taxes or payments for utility bills or for parking tickets, it's the system that is the front end to allow for that collection. So it's connected with or Interact to allow for debit payments for those types of items. And it's a system that is now at the end of its life. It's not being supported well by the vendor that we have currently, and so we are looking for replacement in this year.
Okay, how does it tie into the SAP system on C103?
So through the chair, it is integrated currently with SAP, and the new system that would replace the front-end cashiering system would also, the goal would be to integrate it as well. So it would bring back information from the SAP billing system, but allows for the payment to actually be coming in to the city through the point-of-sale system itself.
So why isn't it funded out of that other account? That other account, I can't believe it. Over a 10-year period and where we've been in the past. Millions of dollars in there.
So through the chair,
I'm sorry, and what bothers me now, I look at unexpended funds yet, mind you, it was November or whatever those figures, what date they were, but there's still $719,000 sitting in the pot. So here, we're asking for another $219,000 in 2019 and another $219,000 in 2026.
Mr. Lautenbach.
So through the chair, the SAP project is really for enhancements related to the billing component of that system and to the financial system itself. There is some money set aside for sort of annual licensing and upgrades that are needed to maintain that system. And there's also staffing costs that are included within the SAP budget within that project. So the point-of-sale system is a separate system outside of that. It is integrated and connected, but that is why it's identified as a separate line item.
I'm not sure that answers my question, but okay, moving on to C-105, what it was, no, is it, sorry. No, I'll leave that. I'll have to come back.
Okay, Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Davey. Just a question on C-105 about the website and internet refresh for 2020. Is that going to be performed by staff, or will that be an external consultant?
Ms. Rabb? Oh. Okay, go ahead.
Through you, Chair Davey, we haven't scoped it out yet. Likely there will be some consultant support on it in terms of doing some of the engagement piece around consumer trends and navigation. In the last refresh that we did on the website, it was led by staff and eSolutions, who is our website vendor. This one would be much more comprehensive. It's about 4 times the budget, so it would be much more comprehensive to include a consultant on that.
Okay, I just was curious about the implications of potentially moving it into the 2019 budget, and if that would just be at all a possibility, or if it's important to wait for 2020.
So I would say, since we just did a refresh in 2016 of the website, the reason 2020 is scoped out is because it will give the CRM project, the customer service project, an opportunity to be integrated with that upgrade at the same time. So I think we will need the full year. Looking to my colleague down the table who's nodding his head.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh.
Thank you. C-103 for the enhancement to the SAP system. Just seeing the breakdown for 2019 amongst our enterprises and capital current. Stormwater is disproportionately paying quite a bit higher. Is there any particular reason compared to the other utilities, which in weight size, they're much bigger? Not literal weight, but you know what I mean.
Mr. Chapman?
Nick is here and can correct me if I'm wrong, but Stormwater, because of its operating deficit earlier on in the capital project, could not fund its fair share, and so there was an agreement at the time to backload its contribution. So you'll see in 2019 through 2021 it's higher, and then in 2022 it drops back down. So this is simply ensuring that they pay their fair share. They couldn't pay it up front, and so it's paid towards the back end.
Just for the benefit of the entire council, could we see a chart in previous years, seeing what it was paying?
Unless Nick can answer the question now. Do you recall, Nick, when the contribution first went up? No? We'll follow.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Gazzola.
Okay, going now to C-69. Okay, we're adding $650,000, and that's found on page C107. I gather it's the years 2021 to 23. Is that where the 650,000 comes in, or? I tried to find it. I don't know, but is that?
Mr. Murray?
Through the chair, yes, the 650 is added over the years that are listed there, pretty much equally across those years.
Over the 10 years?
No, between 2021 to 2023.
So the 3 years. Okay, I thought I read that some. Oh yeah, I read it right there. 20 to. My question is, that's quite a whopping addition to our capital forecast with really no explanation.
Councillor Gazzola, we did receive an email earlier today, just to be careful in terms of...
Today?
Yes.
Okay.
Mayor Bogdanovich?
Yeah, just on that, the old council recall, this was an item that was dealt with in caucus in 2017. And so any questions, any more detailed questions should go back into caucus.
Okay, I've not seen the email, but
it was from Ms. McDonald.
It's a substantial amount of money. There should be some kind of explanation. Okay, I will leave it at that for now.
Okay. No further questions, Councillor Gazzola?
How far are we going to? What?
We are to page 109.
To 109? Sorry.
109, that's where we are, yeah.
Okay, that's fine, to 109. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so there's no one else in the queue, so we're going to do all of community services except for probably fire, I think, is appropriate. We typically take fire separately, so we're going to page, now we're at C110, we're going to page 119. So that's 110 to 119. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yes, I'm on page number C111 with regards to arenas. And I still, yet again, this year don't see the arena for Schlegel Park anywhere in the 10-year capital forecast. I thought I recalled that it was supposed to be added in the last couple of years. For the last couple of years, I've asked this question, and every year I'm told it's going to get in the end the next year, it's going to get in the end next year, and I still don't see it.
Mr. Haggie.
So through the chair, that arena was the lowest indoor priority through the last leisure facilities master plan. It is, as the leisure facilities master plan is being updated right now in anticipation of the next DC study, the capital forecast will be updated based on what those priorities say. So when council approved the last DC study, it was always outside of the 10-year forecast. And so it has continued to remain there.
I think I've been asking this question for years, and I was told in the last DC study that it would end up in the line, and it would end up, and it would end up. Now it's not even going to be really even on a capital budget sheet when we go forward to dealing with the next DC review. And that's very frustrating because this arena initially was in the capital forecast, I think, for 2015. So the fact that I'm not even seeing it in 2028 is deeply concerning. I guess it's not really a question, but...
Yeah, it would be a comment. But
is there any way that I guess I could get an issue paper looking at getting that arena at least put in the 10-year capital forecast in 2027, 2028, and what that impact would be?
Mr. Mayor.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Right now, we are in the process of updating our leisure facilities master plan, and so I think that would be premature to add in a specific facility without the broader context. Certainly the issue of the arena that Councillor Galloway-Seelock has referenced will be considered through the LFMP, and we'll be coming back to you in May. So before you set the DC bylaw in order to ask you to prioritize both indoor and outdoor recreation facilities, and at that time, if council believes that this arena is a top priority, that's when you can make that decision.
It's just very frustrating. I've been around here for 12 budgets now, and it's supposed to be there every year, and it's still not there. So I'm very, very, very frustrated with the way that is being handled. I think that's all my questions on this section.
Thank you, Councillor Singh.
Yes, on C-117, community centers general provision. I see just a kind of straight line increase to the overall budget in the capital forecast. From the general provision, again, the community center needs are quite evolving all the time, and shift in demographics and community needs change quite rapidly. Is the funding to this line adequate to meet our requirements? And I'm not saying staff haven't considered that, but are we putting enough of an emphasis on it, or is this something that we may consider in future years? A greater in-depth look on what those needs are across the board of citywide on day-to-day changes in a community center or neighborhood changes as well.
So through you, Mr. Chair, staff take a comprehensive approach to this line item, so they look at all of the needs from every one of the community centers and then prioritize them. To be honest with you, I believe it's one of those lines that could never have enough money, but we're satisfied with what we have here. It's a good point, and so I'll take it back to the management team to think about in the next couple of years looking more closely at this to see if it requires an increase.
And what I would, I think, appreciate if you do consider that look into consultation of neighbor associations and rec associations. I think they're the best to answer exactly what those needs and deficits may be. I think we look at our overall budget and try to meet within a limited capacity of resources to do the best that we can, but sometimes that's not enough because there's more immediate needs, and with the changes that happen faster than we can budget for. So I think that in-depth look would be helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Gazzola?
Okay, on C-71, relating to C-119, can you just give me a quick refresher from issue paper OP-06, what this $120,000 is for the customer service portal? Just a quick Cole's notes.
Mr. Chair, can I just get clarification? Are you looking for an update in what the portal is or what the capital costs are?
I gather what the portal is. I can see what the capital costs are here, right? They were here, right?
So I'm happy to provide that update. Certainly in the operating package, you had an issue paper, and I'd encourage all councillors to go to page 3 of that issue paper. Because it has a visual mock-up of what the portal is, and I think for the first time explains it better than staff have been able to explain over the past several years. Basically what it is a one-stop shop. It's a place where citizens will be able to go. You'll go to kitchener.ca, and off of the front page, you'll log in using your username and password and be able to access all of the information that you've requested. So let's say you've submitted a property standards bylaw complaint and want to get an update. The portal's where you'll go to get that update. At the same time, if you asked, I want to know about rec programs, we will be sure to proactively send you information about rec programs coming to your closest community center. And so it's allowing residents to get information and access services the way they want to, much quicker and easier.
Okay, thank you. I will go back and review that. I know I've heard that term one-stop shopping for 50 years, and tell me when it's here, because okay. The other question I have is on the CRM software. We have still 162,000 that's unspent, and we have all of these amounts across the board. Why?
So through you, Mr. Chair, when we first, when Council first approved that CRM budget, the concept of an online portal was discussed at that time. When you go back to look at the issue paper, you'll find that 162,000 is going to be put towards the portal, and the request for the additional funding is above and beyond that.
Oh, sorry. It's going to be put towards the next account?
To the portal. So the total...
Does everybody know that?
So through you, Mr. Chair, in the issue paper that's included in your operating budget, it has a chart...
For reference, Councillor Gazzola, that's page 134 in the operating package, okay? Sorry.
It has a specific chart that outlines the capital cost. The total capital cost for the online portal, which, by the way, is run by the CRM, so it's the same system. The total cost is $280,000, and we will be applying the existing funding of approximately $162,000, meaning that what we've added in as new funding is about $120,000. So we're using the money you've identified for the portal.
Okay, I'll just ask you one final question. What if we didn't do that? Where would we be?
So through you, Mr. Chair, as residents, as citizens are able to access all kinds of services, retail online, their expectations for this is growing exponentially. And so we do find a regular series of complaints with our online e-services, and this is a way to make it much easier for our citizens to interact and access city services.
Okay, I haven't experienced that, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes the questions for that. We'll just flip to fire alone, so we're looking at the next page, 120. Any questions on fire? Councillor Singh.
Actually, I don't have a question on fire, but I have a quick question. As you were saying, we're moving on. I was just keying in for community services. Outdoor ice rinks, does that come out of community services?
Mr. May?
That's correct.
Didn't see a line for it, and Council had committed increased funding to that item line.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I do recall that. I believe that component is within INS. Community Services provides support to the volunteers that do the work. So just give us a second and we'll try to track it down within INS, and if that's not correct, I'll jump back in.
Thank you.
Okay, not seeing any questions on fire either, so development, we'll just do development services, so we'll go to page, and economic development, sorry, 125. So 121 to 125, Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On 121, first on development process review, I see the bulk of it, the cost towards the review is coming from DC charge, but 10% still from capital current. Is that a mandatory requirement, or we're just trying to be fair?
Mr. Eadman?
Through the chair, so this budget was established a couple years ago to lead into the development services reviews. There's 2 years of funding. There's one for 2018 and then one for 2019. So we have put together a work plan that spends this money. So I can't speak to the cost breakdown, but a lot of this does benefit the development community. There is some citizen benefit as well to this through the involvement from citizens that have development going on in their community as well. So part of this work plan will look at that aspect of development review as well.
Okay. Just as a rebuttal, I think everything that the city does ultimately doesn't matter what department has a resident benefit. Maybe as part of final budget day, I may put forward a suggestion that it should all of it come through the development charges, unless there's anything that prohibits us doing so.
So yes, there is. Okay. Just like planning studies, there's a mandatory 10% deduction, so 10% has to be funded from non-DC sources.
Okay, thank you. Never mind.
Good try, though. Oh, Councillor Singh, you want to finish? Councillor Singh, finish?
Actually, another one quickly. For energy management revolving fund, because right now we're only looking at over 2 years, the 200,000 consecutive 2019-2020, did we consider having this funded from anywhere else other than capital or current, from a reserve perhaps? And this is something I perhaps would want to see that could be in consideration coming out of like the Hydro Investment Fund, where it's just 2 years, it's a capital infusion as opposed to a operating, which is over a 10-year, and would deplete that fund over a longer period of time as opposed to shorter 2-year span.
Mr. Lautenbach?
Through the chair, we're proposing that this reserve be created because there wasn't a specific reserve that would allow for this sort of intended purpose. So it wasn't something that we looked at in terms of other reserve funds to provide sort of this level of funding. It really is the concept that we set up this reserve specifically for this purpose.
No, I don't question the reserve itself, of that reserve being established, but the funding of that into that reserve perhaps coming from another reserve except for capital or current.
So through the chair, I'll remind council that one of the funding sources for the CC pool is the Hydro Utility Investment Reserve. So notionally, we're taking money out of the Hydro Investment Reserve, putting it in the capital pool, and using that capital pool to create the energy reserve. So we're essentially doing what's being considered.
We are, but again, my point was that if we do it that way, cater to this reserve, it's only over 2 years, as opposed to if you take out of that investment, the Hydro Investment Reserve over into operating, it's over a 10-year, and it's a larger infusion as opposed to 400,000. As suggested earlier by Councillor Gallo, we see like 75,000, I think she had said. That's a 75,000 deduction as opposed to a 400,000 deduction here. So could I just request for an issue paper perhaps as a suggestion, and then Council can vote on that during final budget day. So either from the Hydro Investment Reserve.
Could I just get staff to comment on that just before we take the issue paper? Is there a simple answer to that question, or is it requiring an issue paper? I'm not sure I completely follow the...
I think the request is, can we take another $200,000 out of the Hydro Reserve over the next 10 years, which would essentially draw its balance down.
Not over the next 10 years. I'm seeing at the reserve, there's only a line for 2 years.
Right, and so when it was discussed, it was that funding is meant to be the seed funding for the energy reserve, and then we use that to complete projects, and then those projects pay that back. So it's a revolving fund that's continually being
invested. And I appreciate that, but you were making it seem as if I'm suggesting that 200,000 come from the Hydro Investment Reserve Fund over a 10-year period. I'm not saying that. I'm saying just the seed funding come from another reserve as opposed to capital or current. And when I say another reserve, I can make two suggestions. One is probably more palatable to me than the other, perhaps the Economic Development Reserve Fund or the Hydro Investment Reserve Fund. Those are my two suggestions. If an issue paper is not necessary, that's perhaps a suggestion I will put forward into final budget day, again, as opposed to perhaps supporting an earlier suggestion of 75,000 out of the reserve into operating. So we're still dipping into that reserve. I'm just outlining a different option.
Okay.
Yeah.
Point of clarification, Councillor Gallagher-Silac.
In essentially what Councillor Singh is suggesting is taking money out of the Hydro Investment Fund in order to fund this, but it's already potentially being funded out of that fund.
Correct. So if we take it out of the capital forecast, the CCS goes down, we can reduce the transfer from the Hydro Reserve and then take $200,000 from the Hydro Reserve and move it to the energy
but it would still be CC funding.
Yes, it would.
Yeah.
How would it be CC? Okay.
Because the hydro investment is part of the CC funding pool.
Not the reserve. The reserve sits right there with a balance.
But the reserve feeds into...
I guess the simple question is, how does this, if your suggestion, how does it create benefit? Like, I don't understand the...
So maybe I can touch base with staff to get more clarity. I don't want to do that around the horseshoe right now to everyone else's benefit. My understanding was that reserve maintains a certain minimum maximum balance into reserve to offset any fluctuations in the dividend that we get from the Hydro Corporation. That was my understanding. I will look to staff to get clarification at a later point. And if that's a reserve that's sitting there, I was looking to have that reserve fund the seed funding into this new reserve that we're establishing, as opposed to coming out of capital current. But as I said, I will get further information from staff to see if that does make sense. If it does, I will hopefully try to help to provide more greater information with staff's assistance and put that suggestion forward on final budget day.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gazzola?
Yes, there's a lot of talk about taking money from here, from there, and the other way. I would like to just make a point before I go into what I'm going to ask, so that you can see where I'm going with it. I look at our impact on our customers now, setting aside the minor difference from the gas utility, setting that aside, our impact on our customers right now is 4.5% over last year. I would like to see that impact be down at the inflation rate. And what that means is somehow reducing the charges we use for utility rates. Now, I'm not advocating any change in spending on infrastructure that we're doing, but in order to do what I would like to see done, it means that we may have to cut some capital projects and use that money from the tax-based thing to help out with the utility operation, but and the bottom line is the impact on our customers will be down, instead of 4.5%, 2.5%. So in line with, and that's where I'm going when if I make some suggestions here, and that's where earlier I was looking at. If you look at C73 and C121, dealing with the Energy Management Revolving Fund. And I would first like to make the comment, I made some comments last week, and I was labeled in the media and from a number of emails I got as denying climate change. I'm not denying climate change. I was looking at different ways of funding things. Okay. Here we have this $400,000. Would it not be possible to fund that in the same manner that we're funding the LED conversion of our hydro lights, and do the same thing here, and that would reduce this line in our capital forecast by $400,000. And if we do enough changes like that, we can reduce the amount that the utilities have to throw into the capital, and thereby come up with a overall impact on our customers of 2.5% instead of 4.5%. So I'm asking the question here, is it not possible to deal with this $400,000 in a different manner so that it's removed, so that the impact is really removed? It's really borrowing from ourselves.
Mr. Hagee?
So through the chair, it's a possibility that we could do that. That's essentially what we did with the LED project. That one, I would suggest, is a bit cleaner because it's a self-contained, truly identifiable thing. This is meant to be a revolving fund for a number of types of projects, so tracking some of those changes could be a little more difficult. It's a potential for funding, for saving on funding. I would note that it's only in the short term, though, not a long-term gain. So if there was a permanent decrease to utility rates, we would have to catch that up in a future year, just to restore funding permanently to the utilities.
And to clarify then too, and we're talking about $400,000. So even if we took all of that in the first year, that means we got to come up with that $400,000 next year, and further, that's not going to get us to inflation. That's going to get inflation. Getting us to inflation is going to be like $2.5 million, not $400,000.
Oh, I know that.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm well aware of that. Yeah. You have to build with little stones, and eventually you can build the pyramids. Okay, that's my question. It's possible to do that. I have a number of other questions going forward. This is on C74, and then it goes to, I guess, C122. It's just what to do with the brownfield program. We have increased that apparently. No. The question I'm asking is, what is in there? We've got almost $3 million in the pot already. Well, what is that? And now we've got a bunch of monies that we're putting there across the years. And you notice these are all CC funded, so that's what impacts our tax levy. So,
Mr. Bloom?
Through the chair, so
Perhaps for the committee members that may be new to the Brownfield program, it is a tax increment grant program. So council approves applications as they come in. I believe we've got 7 that have been approved by council that we, over a period of could be up to 10 years, we rebate the taxes back on that property in order to fund the environmental remediation of that project. So we've got a forecast of what those 7 projects will cost us over the next 10 years, and then finance figures out how to cash flow that over the course of the 10 years.
What is our commitment at this point for the next 10 years?
Through the chair, I'll give you 2019. The projected 2019 cost is about $1.9 million if all 7 projects, 1.1 million if all 9 come in this year, all 7 request their funding this year, and that projects outward. So some will appreciate that all 7 were not approved in the same year, so some will end sooner than others, but the 2019 impact is a little over $1 million.
Oh, is what?
Is about $1.1 million.
Yeah, okay, so we've got $1.1 million, but we've got $2.7 million in the pot already. Is there leeway here that we can work with?
Mr. Chapman, you want to go first?
Through the chair on this one, no. We'd rather not put an extra penny into this account if we don't need to. As we have applications approved, we put the cash flow in budget. You're right, the timing doesn't always line up, and because the timing is dependent on when the property is reassessed by MPAC, which, as you know, can take up to 3 years. But the funds that are in this account are tied to approved projects and those in the pipeline.
I don't want to put any in here. I want to take out of here.
Pardon me?
I don't want to put anything in here. I want to take out of here.
And my point is, if you take anything out of these existing balance, you'll put it right back into the forecast.
You'll put it what?
Right back into the forecast, because these are tied to approved applications.
I'm told that approved applications are 1.1 million, and we're budgeting here 9 million plus we've already got 2.7 million in the pot. So I'm not arguing about our commitments.
What I'd be happy to do is circulate the detailed forecast, and you'll see, Councillor Gazzola, that in total the amount ties to what we're forecasting. Again, this is subject to MPAC's timeline to reassess it, and so that would simply account for the difference and the existing account balance.
But they're not commitments.
They are commitments. They're legal commitments that we've entered into agreements
that we've agreed to?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I don't want to give you a necessity of going to a long issue paper. You can that's the reason, the first question I asked, what are our commitments? And the answer I got was 1.1 million. I guess the question I was asking, really, when I started, what is the commitment over the period of this capital forecast? Because we have $12 million, we'll have $12 million in the pot. What is our commitment? So I guess that was the original question.
Okay. And so we'd be pleased to report back on that.
Yeah, okay. I don't want to give you a lot of work to do on that, okay? That's fine. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Hay, do you want to add? Oh, sorry, try that again. There you go.
I turned myself off when you came to me. The commitment over the 10 years is for that $12 million. So it's fully committed and allocated.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. On this page also, there's downtown incentives funding of $500,000 still unspent. What is that? Is that to do with does that tie into the development charges, or?
Through the chair, so the $500,000 unspent is So for the new members of council, we have a building permit rebate program. A couple years ago, we as council made the decision to reduce who could apply for that. It used to be available to any major redevelopment, in which case the permits can cost upwards of $500,000. There are still a few projects that were approved prior to that change that we still are obligated to, and it's about $500,000 worth of a potential rebate that we still owe on those projects.
Okay, on page C74 and C124, it's on. You're increasing the City Hall programming by some, $75,000. Was that ever discussed, or where was that decision made?
Through the chair, so the context of that's a one-time capital ask. Essentially, our events have grown to a scale, both size and numbers, that we now require some new equipment to ensure the safety and well-being of the residents that attend it, and it's a one-time expense that we need.
Well, should we not be getting a little more detail on this as to, what is it? 75, all these $75,000 amounts can add up to quite a few dollars.
So through the chair, in this case, we've been advised by the province that any major festival, unfortunately the world we live in, could be subject to danger. And you can draw 2 and 2 together what that means, and that we've been advised that we need to put increased security measures in place just to keep our residents safe.
Well, I can't argue about that, but I'm just saying, there's no detail telling me that. Okay, it just says we want $75,000 more. Boom, bang. I just feel there should be a little more detailed explanation. It's a big $1 billion we're spending here. So, all right, going on to, within this group of accounts, I see that the Chris Kindle Market has an unspent balance of $136,000. What is that?
Through the chair, so the Chris Kindle market is funded out of this capital account. Why it's looking that way is obviously I believe this is reporting as of mid-November, so most of Chris Kindle's expenses happen in December and as well into January when all the expenses come through. So essentially this is an account that's been set up to help them manage their cash flow year to year, so that number will be drawn down significantly.
That's okay. Excuse me for interrupting. Yeah, if you're telling me it's going to be gone by the end of the year, that's fine, no problem. However, going on, there's a music film amount set aside of $130,000. What's that for?
Through the chair, council may recall that they approved an issue paper this past year, which is to establish a film, music, and interactive media office, and that is actually being funded out of the reserve. So what you're seeing here is just a transfer from the reserve to fund that program for 2 years.
Okay. Going on to C75, which deals with a whole pile of projects. Right?
You're jumping ahead, but there's no one else in the queue, you can stay in, Councillor.
What did you say you were going to?
Actually, let's just do all of road reconstruction right now, which takes us to...
I thought you were doing all of development services.
Yeah, so all the way to 147 now. If anyone wants to queue in for that, so we're looking at pages 125 to 147, okay?
Okay, I want to go back to, and I'll ask this question of Mr. Hagee. I'm looking at C75, but it really relates to a ton of projects starting on C1, C127, and actually on C131 for a number of pages. It's catching up with our infrastructure program, and it's funded by the Triple T funding. And that funding comes out of the utilities budgets. And my question I asked Mr. Hagee before is if we can reduce the amount that's coming from those utility budgets, and then instead of finding the money that we're required from there, finding it in other projects that we've added to the capital forecast. Can we thereby accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish? It's a theoretical question, and I'd like what your answer would be. If we can reduce the source of funding for those Triple T projects, not reduce the projects, carry on at the same speed we're going, but get some help from from the tax-based side of our business to help the utility side of our business, and thereby come up with a reduced impact on our customers.
Mr. Hagee.
So yes, it would be possible to fund some of these from tax. It's a deviation from the current way we fund, but the discussion was about, it's about $30 million a year that's going in 2019. Could that in part be funded by tax? Yes, it could. It would be significant decreases to other tax-supported capital projects, though, so we would have to find significant reductions in those other areas in order to achieve it.
Or increase taxes.
Or increase taxes, yes.
Yes. Well, I guess I'm asking the question. At the commencement of the meeting, I stated that over the 10-year period, we're adding about $40 million, that more than we had at this point last year. So, we've added a lot of things. Well, maybe for a couple of years until we can flatten out the impact on our customers, maybe we don't add all of these things. It's a debatable topic.
Well, that's our decision, Councillor Gazzola. We have to put forward what you want to not do.
So I have to go and find it all? You usually ask staff for an issue paper as to how they could deal with that issue. Am I not clear in what I'm trying to do?
No, it's clear. It's your suggestion is, how do we find 2.1% off of that total combined bill, because you excluded gas, which means we need $2.5 million operating, so every year. So it's up to us to either put forward something to cut or to prove it.
I would ask for staff. I think it's a legitimate request, and I would ask if we can have some issue paper as to how that might be done.
So I'm going to, and you're right to ask that, certainly. I'm going to assume from staff that this is something that would require a significant amount of work, and I think would require a vote of committee, but look to Mr. Chapman.
Through the chair, I would concur with your statement. This would represent a fundamental change in direction on the part of council. We spent extensive time last year doing work, engaging the community, and engaging council on options around utility investment. Council did not choose the gold standard, but acknowledged that there is failing infrastructure under the ground that needs replacement, and approved a 5-year program to implement that. If you gave us this direction, it would certainly turn back the clock on all of that work.
So, Councillor Gazzola, I'll put it back to you.
I'm asking for an issue paper. If you won't award it to me, I would ask for a vote be taken on whether I get the issue paper, and that would be that.
Okay, and again, absolutely, you're right to ask. I will take that motion and I will open it to comments specifically on this. I have Mayor Vrbanovich, is it on this? And Councillor Singh on this?
Something else, but I may speak to it.
Okay, yes. So I will take, we do a very busy day, so we'd ask you to keep your comments as brief as possible. And I'll begin with Councillor Singh, you're first in the queue. So so everyone's clear, the request is for staff to come back for final budget day for options to reduce the total impact to the homeowner by 2.1% to get it down to 2.4%, which is the current rate of inflation. Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, I would even settle for
2%, okay. So, Councillor Singh, when you're ready.
And for clarification, because I heard a contradictory explanation by Mr. Chapman, so we wouldn't be, I'm hearing that Councillor Gazzola is saying that he would want to see deferral of some other capital projects to make up that difference, where capital projects are taking infusion from the utilities. So we would still be able to maintain that commitment, it's just that we're deferring some other projects. That's what I'm hearing, so I just want clarification from Councillor Gazzola or Mr. Chapman.
Okay, so clarification from Councillor Gazzola. What you said, maintain the work that's being done, referring to the utilities. So what areas would you want staff to look at reducing?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
Yes, no. We've made the case of what we have to do under the WIP. I think that case is made. I'm not sure that we're spending all the money we're collecting, so I don't look for it there. I would look at other, like I say, we're adding 38 million. So yes, in a sense, it would be a deferral in that staff are recommending it to do it now. Maybe we have to pass those things on and do them 1 or 2 years down the road. Maybe there is a part of it becomes a slight deferral. The first part of it becomes, we've added an awful lot here, so let's not add as much.
And for that explanation, Mr. Chair, as Councillor Gazzola continues to remind us, and I don't necessarily disagree, the buck does stop with council. It's for us to determine where those priorities needs to be, not for staff to come forward with suggestions of what they can cut or defer. So if he's looking to do that, I think it's suggestions that he needs to put forward, as opposed to leave it to staff to determine what's palatable and what's not.
Thank you, Mayor Rumenovich.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I won't be supporting this motion and would really urge Council very strongly not to support the motion. I can appreciate what Councillor Gazzola is trying to do, and I think that is part of our collective responsibility around this horseshoe. But I think we need to remember that the budget isn't a document that is put together willy-nilly, over a few hours and put before council for our consideration. There has literally been hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of work collectively through the corporation that has been done to bring the budget forward in a manner that's consistent with the expectations of council. Now, granted, those expectations were initially set by the previous council. That's one of the realities as we go through this, annual or this transition every 4 years. But it's really based on certain key principles, and those principles included a tax rate at or below the rate of inflation. And staff have certainly delivered on that, and it's also built on the principle that as we do this, we will reflect other policy decisions that have been made, and those policy decisions included the policy decisions that were made around infrastructure and phasing it in over a number of years, as Mr. Chapman had indicated. I think it's also important to remember that most members of council, if not all, ran on that level of fiscal accountability going forward. And in fact, we also have the Environic survey that reminded us of what the community's expectations are. And the community's expectations are based on that. The election results have reaffirmed that even further. And to now all of a sudden, be suggesting that we're going to go and try and cut, $2 million. Well, let me tell you, that's not going to come without closing swimming pools, without closing parks, without moving forward on important infrastructure, and simply putting it on to future generations. And I, for one, am not prepared to do that.
Okay, we're lighting up. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, I had a point of clarification for Councillor Gazzola as well. So, just so I know exactly what we would be voting on here with your motion, you would be looking at delaying and deferring the infrastructure projects that we have on here with regards to various streets, etc. That's what I'm looking for as a point of clarification from you.
No, Councillor Gazzola indicated that he wanted to see all of the combined water works continue, and that staff find the savings in other capital projects or operating projects. So water would continue, but things like community centers could be deferred, and basically everything else is on the table.
Okay. So it wouldn't be with regards to these specific, or it would be an overall reduction of 2.5%, is that right?
I think essentially everything's on the table except for the combined water infrastructure. Correct, Councillor Gazzola?
Can I answer?
Yeah, please.
Okay, a couple of points first, okay? I know better than anyone around this table how hard staff works and what they have to do to put this budget paper together. And repeatedly this morning I've said on a number of occasions that I respect staff, they're professionals, they know what they're doing a great job. And for the mayor to say that I am stating that, or implying that the budget was put together on a willy-nilly basis is improper, okay? Another point, I happened to run on my re-election with one of the main components that I took to my constituents was that I want to see the impact on the households at the inflation rate and the impact on our customer. And we are suppliers not only of taxes but also of utilities. They cannot get their utilities anywhere else. So I ran on that point, okay? And I got reelected. And I'm not, there are so many projects here. I'm not seeing the necessity to close swimming pools, to close this and to close that. That is unfair. Okay? I'm not taking away that there are lots of places that changes can be made. Okay? That's all.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Johnson, please finish.
Yes. Again, I was just looking for a point of clarification on exactly what we would be voting on. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Chapman?
Yeah. I think the suggestion is quite progressive, actually. And I think given the current political economic situation that we're living, where people the aging population is on a fixed income, where rents are going up because of the development that's happening, I think there is virtue in trying to keep those rates at the rate of inflation. Where that money is going to come from, I have no suggestion on what that might be, but I think it is worth exploring further to try to I also ran on a campaign of no increases above the inflation rate, and it'd be nice to see that if we could keep to that sort of bar. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Schneider?
Thank you, Chair Davey. My concern is that we'll simply put projects off and then have to pay for them later anyway. So while we may get a saving this year, there could be increased costs and tax increases in the years to come.
So I will comment. Councillor Singh, I have you. I assume you're for the next part, right? Okay. This is actually quite interesting because this, as a much younger, wet behind the ears councillor, I proposed something very similar way back in 2010 and was successful. The big difference, I think, at that time was the proposed combined tax increase was far more significant. It predated the target of inflation on the tax side. And we were successful in that, and it went forward. And to be frank, it was also coming off of the 2008 recession, when people, I would argue, were struggling much more and unemployment was much higher. Since then, things have changed significantly. There are two parts to the budget, as I've always seen it. The one side is the parts that we can barely control safely, and that is our water, our sewer, our stormwater, where we either fund it or we risk we basically risk health and safety, and not that that's Councillor Gazzola's suggestion. The other side is the controllable side, that we can actually cut back or add as we see fit to have appropriate services for our residents. And for that portion, we've pulled the public, and that number has been inflation, and we have hit that every single year since then. So changing the goalposts at this time, when there is really no crisis, there's no crisis in the economy, there's no crisis in terms of we're not facing a 10% tax increase here. I think it's, frankly, I think it's dangerous and inappropriate and will cause unnecessary controversy in our community. So I absolutely will not be supporting this. Councillor Chapman, I have you in. Typically, we only comment once. No. Apologies. And we're getting significantly behind time here, so. So with that, we'll take a motion. Was there a recorded vote? Recorded vote on this. Sorry? Okay, there's been a request that we repeat the motion. So the motion is essentially that staff go back and try and find 2% in savings, combined savings, without affecting water, sewer, stormwater utilities and expenditures. For an issue paper, correct. Yeah, for issue paper for suggestions for staff, yeah. Those in favor? And those opposed? Okay. The motion fails. Okay, moving along, Councillor Singh, you're next in the queue.
Yeah, thank you. So C76, laneway rehabilitation program. Can staff help to just refresh for returning and new members of council? Specifics to that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the laneway program is an annual program. We have to resurface laneways in the city. Excuse me. These laneways, this program started in around 2012. We had a certain funding level for that. Our production was not as high as we had hoped at that time, so we've increased that expenditure.
And most of these laneways are just, or I think exclusively in the downtown, are they not?
Sorry, I didn't hear
the
that.
The laneways are exclusively in the downtown area?
Predominantly, yeah, in the older areas of the city, that's where we find the laneways.
And have we looked at the necessity of retaining the laneways, or that level of infrastructure of laneways?
We do, through you, Mr. Chair. A lot of these laneways do serve as the primary access for a lot of these properties, so we have to keep them.
Because there's such a exclusive benefit to these laneways, specific to those property owners only, do we have a way of funding some of these improvements to these laneways that's paid through them as opposed to a citywide?
Through you, Mr. Chair, similar to any other rehab program in the city, it is funded through just general taxes and fed gas, so we do not assess each property.
So my only concern is the reduction of the $2.7 million over 10 years for resurfacing of city streets, keeping in mind most streets, these amounts are quite heavy on the overall budget to do any resurfacing of any one street. So a $2.7 million reduction is about $270,000. Would you say that's one street, or probably far less than that to cover?
I'm sorry?
So $2.7 million reduction to resurfacing city streets over 10 years is a $270,000 reduction year over year.
Correct.
Would $270,000 go to resurface one street? I know some streets are bigger than others, but at average.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, it just depends on the method of rehab. However, last year we did about 10 kilometers of street for about $4 million, so about $400 a meter. Yeah, I mean that's the rate of production.
So what I'm trying to see is how much of a reduction in service would our citizens see if we are reducing resurfacing of city streets. And because we're looking at reduction to this line, whenever we resurface a street, we don't necessarily just do that. We also dig down and replace infrastructure that's underground. So are we looking at reduction to that with programs through this, or that's already been incorporated?
No, just if I heard you correctly, this program is simply resurfacing, so it's not any underground infrastructure in this program. It would just be either two of the main rehab options would be mill and replace. So we would mill the top section of the asphalt off, repave. Another one is just remove all the asphalt and repave it, and they have different costs, but there's generally no underground infrastructure.
And that's the, on C-147, the top line, which is pavement resurface treatment, right? Or is that something different? Those are the options sometimes, either do a full resurface or treatment.
Yeah, those are two different programs, but it's the resurfacing city streets that we're talking about, the $2.7 million reduction over 10 years.
So what... Okay, I have more questions to this. I think I'll just reach out to you, Steve, to see if perhaps we could allocate some greater amount to the pavement resurface treatment. So if we are reducing overall resurfacing of streets citywide, then there could be some greater emphasis on some interim treatment. I think it's only fair because there are residents on certain streets have been waiting for years and years, and seeing this reduction where we're trying to meet a commitment to the laneway rehabilitation at their cost, they may be not equitable for them.
Okay, Councillor Gazzola?
Don't go away.
Yeah, you might want to hang up for a second, Mr. Allen.
This has nothing to do with your WIP program, right? This is just doing city streets that, how long does a resurfacing job last?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it really depends on the approach. As I said, one of the methods is a full depth replacement, so that's probably 20 years.
Okay, so a street could be resurfaced several times before we get into the WIP program, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. What you're doing here is you're taking on C-147. You're taking some money out of there, out of the second. Is it the second? Yeah, and you're putting some of it into laneway, and you're putting some of it into bridge, and that's over the 10-year period. So you're able to do that, right? You're able to do that without any great impact on our resurfacing?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's the amount of work that we then cannot do under the resurfacing program. Based on last year's rates, it works out to about 600 or 700 meters of resurfacing. So yes, 600 or 700 meters of resurfacing has to be deferred.
Yeah, you can do it without shutting down the store, okay?
Mr. Chapman, do you want to add?
What might be helpful is for Mr. Allen to comment on pavement quality. So the basis for this decision is around an acceptable level of pavement quality, and what I would suggest to you is that what's been determined as satisfactory from an engineering perspective may not be satisfactory to citizens, but that's the determination that's been made in setting this budget level.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, okay, and I appreciate that. You do a study every year, check all our roads, and yeah, you have and no problem. I just see that you can do these things. I have a sort of a narrow question on the bridge rehabilitation, sort of parochial. I have a problem with the bridge in the Wilson Park, where someday some child is going to get swept away, heaven forbid. And it's a question, I'm not sure what the cost of that, but is that project in our capital forecast now?
Ms. McGoldrick.
So through you, Chair Davey, the bridges that you're referring to in Wilson Park, those aren't part of the bridge line item that you're looking at.
They aren't?
On the current page.
They aren't?
No, there's a separate parks bridge replacement in the budget.
I don't care what it is. Is it in the budget?
And no, those are not funded in the current
So it's not in the
year.
capital forecast? $1 billion, it's not in there.
Okay, and just a reminder, we're not at bridges yet, Councillor Gazzola, so...
No, we are at bridges in that...
We're going to page 147, so we're not doing bridges yet.
$500,000 was taken out of here for bridges, right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, but I think that money would have gone to the road bridges in the engineering budget, not parks bridges.
You're right. I'm wrong. I agree. That's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor
I
Marsh?
have other questions and.
Okay. Okay, Councillor Marsh, sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to touch base on the laneway rehabilitation program as well. It seems to me that a lot of the laneways that need rehabilitation work have some flooding issues. Is that correct? Is that one of the impetuses for increasing the stormwater utility funding of that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. That is the reason we're taking more stormwater out of it. So a lot of these laneways don't have existing storm sewers on them. When we go to rehabilitate them, to address some complaints that we have with low spots and flooding into adjacent properties, we find we have to install storm sewers on these where there was none before.
Okay. And so also when I've worked with staff over the last few years on various laneway issues, my understanding is that there are some laneways that really nobody needs to access their driveway, or sorry, nobody needs to use as a vehicle access, but most of them do. And I'm just wondering if staff have given some thought to doing an overall just a review of what are the laneway needs, so that, to Councillor Singh's point, that some of the laneways that in previous generations were required for horse and buggies are no longer required, and so perhaps we can look at no longer servicing them in the future. Is that something that staff have put their mind to as yet?
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that would probably fall under transportation planning's purview to look at roads that could be closed and whether they're used or not. So I'll leave that for their comment. But as I said, all the lanes that we typically work with under these programs, there's quite a need for access through them.
Quite a need, because this is where people's only garage access would be, for example.
Correct. In a few cases, we've found it's their only access. It's primary access.
Yeah. So if we didn't, if we, I guess what I'm saying is that, I think that there are some opportunities here to make sure that we're not doing any redundant work, but I think that at this point, it doesn't look like that's where we're at. So I would just ask that staff consider looking at the laneways that are that are no longer being used for vehicles, and to make sure that we're not doing any unnecessary work.
Very good. Councillor Singh?
Yes. Kind of quick question back to the laneway rehabilitation program, and I agree with Councillor Sarah Marsh. I think that's some look that we should be doing. And hopefully staff will carry forward that. The other is as part of our DC bylaw review, and in the past we've had a DC exemption in the downtown, and to my earlier question, most of these laneways are in the downtown core. Could we incorporate the reconstruct or improvements to these laneways through that review? Not right now, but as part of the review, could that be considered?
Mr. Haggie?
Through the chair, the only way they could be considered as part of the DC project is if they're servicing growth. I would suggest that the laneway rehab, it's just restoring what's already there. It would not have any growth component, so it could not be funded by DCs.
Okay, all right, but I wasn't sure if that's something that we could look at arguing, because again, there is growth happening in a core, and if those laneways exist, it is to service that new growth.
Mr. Chapman, to add?
So the way that we could achieve what you're suggesting is by looking carefully at each project. We do charge development in the central neighborhoods the intensification allowance, which pays for oversizing or growth-related infrastructure. And so as we look at each laneway, if there is capacity added to service growth in that area, that is something that we could legitimately charge against that account. And so I believe engineering does that as a matter of course, and would on these projects as well.
Good. Well, I'm glad that we're trying to achieve that. 1-50. Sorry, how long? Till what page are we going to?
We're stopping at bridges, so we're going to 147.
Okay, then I'll come back.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gazzola?
No, I'm on Well, I'm on 148, that's bridge.
Yeah, no bridges.
Pardon?
No bridges. No bridges or walls.
Oh, okay.
Mayor Rabinovich?
Thank you. Just very quickly, and I'm pleased that we're, looking at this broad, this laneway issue from a broader perspective. But I think one thing to keep in mind as well, I mean, compared to, I think, the other cities in the region, we seem to have less of them, which is a good thing. But is it also reasonable to say that, generally speaking, in areas where there is a laneway, those roads also tend to be a fair bit narrower than what a current suburban cross-section would be? In other words, a current cross-section is X meters. A traditional one in the older part of the city is several meters less, some of which then ends up being taken up by these laneways.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's probably a good general rule, is that because they're in the downtown environment, the road cross sections are generally smaller in those than new development.
Right, because in many of those laneways, you would access your garage through the back laneway because there weren't any driveways and garages in the front. And that's just part of the challenge of what we have to deal with.